In the suburbs of the city of Hue, a huge castle of one of the oligarchs who had enormous influence on the local government was built. That evening, the rich man gathered people close to him, who looked down on one young man who was sitting on his knees behind the owner. He raised his right hand upwards, where he concentrated his inner energy. In this way, he managed to ignite a ball of energy that glowed in the air. A young man named Bai Xing did not like this schedule of events very much. He was forbidden to look into the eyes of the guests, so his gaze was lowered. His owner was showing off his new purchase. The man pointed his hand at the young man and asked his friends to rate the addition to his collection. He called Bai Xin the first and only specimen in the whole world. According to the millionaire, the addition to his collection has become a living lantern. The rich man was incredibly pleased, as this living lantern had already brought him fame. There was a lot of talk about the young man in Hue. The man introduced to his guest the loser Bai Xin, who had an incredible level of strength. Even management paid attention to him, but he was only able to conduct the F-rank skill. The millionaire was tired of constantly looking at his living lantern. So today, he put the young man up for auction and promised his guest to give him cheaply. Bai Xun looked at the ominous smiles of the people around him and understood that justice does not exist in this world, and there are no good people. The young man looked at the guests with a sinister look and said in his mind that he would destroy everyone down to the only one on this earth who had done him wrong. While continuing to hold the energy ball, Bai Xing clenched his teeth tightly and promised himself that no human being would be alive because of me. A few years ago, the world was polluted. A great disaster was waiting for him, which came absolutely without reason and without warning. The statue of the great Valkyrie mutated. The woman's eyes began to glow as if she were coming back to life and starting to act as a portal. Thanks to this statue, 100-meter stone monsters were summoned to the real world, and they razed almost all cities to the ground without anyone noticing them. Energy portals turned into interspatial gates. Now the real world was accessed by incomprehensible beings from completely different dimensions. Adventure Island was completely engulfed by the mold of sinister monsters. Demons of absolutely different shapes and sizes captured this island. A small shop selling mysterious things in a botanical town suddenly turned into a huge book and began to appear in cities all over the world. People, animals, and all physical things that came under the influence of this book were drawn into it and could no longer return to the real world. A curse called infection fell upon reality. A leaf that flew by could be infected in a few seconds and die on the spot. Worse, a person who was walking his pet could be infected. This caused very terrible emotions in the entire population on Earth. Any object, even a tool in the hand, could be infected. No one was immune from this, so it is almost impossible to predict this. During the 6 months of the monster's invasion of the Earth, the population of the fertile planet was almost halved due to not very favorable conditions for procreation. It was at that moment, when the Earth was experiencing its almost complete collapse, that people appeared on the planet who were called adventurers. The seeker of me was called people who gained incredible skills during the infection. They won the respect of people, fame, and wealth. Their main task was to cleanse the infected and everything that could threaten the safety of the local population, such as the demons themselves. Searchers were very loved and appreciated because they saved people. The population placed their last hopes on them, that one day they would live a normal life again. Bai Xing took the news of the infection very unexpectedly. He had dreamed of becoming an adventurer all his life, especially after some news. The young man walked forward with a briefcase. His gaze was as blank and indifferent as possible. For some time, it was not at all like him. Suddenly, a sinister smile appeared on the boy's face as he realized that he was back on track. Bai Xing was able to be reborn again. He again saw around him people in the same uniform. He blamed his environment for the problems, so he believed that none of those present was unworthy of life. With a sinister smile on his face, the young man continued to examine his peers and older participants. His gaze rested on the school children. Bai Xing looked up and saw a huge arena. He immediately understood that the seeker exam was to begin in just a few minutes. When the young man was watching the former commentary area, someone's hand, which was completely tattooed, landed hard on his shoulder. A middle-aged blonde man greeted the boy superficially and asked if he had decided to hide from him in the crowd to avoid the inevitable problems. The man looked at the young man with an evil look and asked if he knew what would happen. This time, if he failed the exam again and did not become an adventurer. Bai Xing unexpectedly met his old acquaintance Kim Hookit. It was one of the main characters who broke the young man's life in the past. Bai Xing immediately remembered the moment when he was unable to answer the man. Then he completely broke him verbally and took him to himself as a slave. Kim Hookit was still waiting for an answer from the young man and asked if he had swallowed his tongue and could not answer anything to the simplest question. Without waiting for an answer, the man drew the attention of all the students around him. He shouted loudly and asked to look at the young man next to him. Kim Hookit gestured to a seeker program examinee who was trying to pass the exam for the third time and was only relying on his odd strength level. The school children immediately recognized Bai Sin, who was a very famous loser. Well, almost all participants knew a young man who could not show himself even once. The students began to mock Bai Shin because with his incredible level of strength, he could do absolutely nothing, let alone pass the exam. Kim Hookit tapped the young man on the shoulder and asked him from above if the attention from the public had given him the strength to finally come to this stupid exam. The man emphasized that the young man must pass the exam so that he can sell it somewhere, and thus Bai Xing will be able to pay off his debt. At the first meeting with the young man was very worried. However, after his rebirth, he already knew what was going to happen, so he silently listened to everything. Bai Xing looked at his interlocutor and remembers that he died of infection even before he had time to get even with him. This time he wanted to do something a little different. After looking at the man for a while with his cold eyes, Bai Xing suddenly raised his right hand and grabbed the interlocutor by the collar, which literally shocked him. Looking directly into the eyes of his opponent, the young man said that Kim Hookit was somehow incredibly excited. Had he started eating his pets again? The man did not understand why the young man suddenly started joking about it. He became incredibly angry and called the interlocutor a real abomination. Kim Hookit was not going to tolerate such statements on his side. He swung his fist and was about to scold the young man for his long, sharp tongue. Bai Xing was absolutely not against this development of events. He put his right hand forward as if asking the interlocutor to continue his actions. The young man pointed his finger at his face and told the man to kill right there. He asked to note that due to facial injuries, he may fail the exam again. Bai Xing looked at the interlocutor's face and asked how he would then explain the situation to the boss, why he returned to him again without money. Kim Hookit understood that the young man was indeed right. He had to stop his fist because he didn't want to get in trouble with his boss again. The man released his target for bullying. Bai Xing took a few steps back and Kim Hookit finally took his hand back. The man warned the young man about his rash actions and advised him to try very hard. The exam will come, otherwise he will regret his weakness. Kim Hookit almost jumped when Bai Xing raised his hand almost to his face. He was very wary and did not understand anything at all. The young man folded his 3 fingers into an imaginary gun and fired at his target. He made as confident a face as possible and said that he had noticed the man. After that, Bai Xing turned his back to the interlocutor and headed towards the crowd, telling the man to wait for him here after passing the exam. The participants of the exam turned their faces away from the loser. They did not want to deal with a young man who was not capable of anything at all given his capabilities. Absolutely all the participants turned away from him, advising him to go somewhere far away. Bai Xing did not pay attention to those around him and simply stepped forward. In a few years, he got used to this attitude towards himself. However, the young man did not give up and believed that sooner or later, he would prove his strength to everyone. 3 years ago, the Seeker exam was held on the territory of Hue High School. Quite a lot of people gathered and everyone was waiting for their turn to take the exam. It was finally the turn of a young man named Bai Xing. He came on stage and said he wanted to become an adventurer to protect humanity and liberate the world. Bai Xing had roughly spent his skills at the age of 16, which was completely normal. If the participants fell below the criteria of talent and strength level, they were accepted into the Seeker. The main skill of the Seeker was called talent. The level of strength was measured by the points that the participant had from birth. Bai Xing's number was 1,200. Those present were simply shocked when they heard such an incredible number. They called the young man the future of the country because other contestants had more than 100 points. Director Pushkin was invited to the stage. The man had the ability to predict the future, so he was an integral part of every Seeker exam. The old man with the beard took a few steps onto the stage and caught thunderous applause. After that, he put his hand on the young man's head and began to look into his future. Pushkin said that he still does not see how this boy will be able to walk through life, but he could say only one thing for sure. He clearly saw that Bai Xing would exceed all the expectations of his critics. The man saw that the young man would become a star that would shine brighter than all others. The contestants were simply shocked by Pushkin's verdict. He did not say such things even about the main defender of the country, but here he was generous with words for an unknown young man. At that moment, Bai Xing was very happy and decided that this would be the end of his poor life and his family would be able to live a normal life. Bai Shun smiled pleasantly when he imagined a happy father who does not work in construction and a sister who can buy herself absolutely anything. Literally, after a few days, the young man began to receive various offers. Big organizations wanted to get their hands on the diamond at any price. Bai Xing simply could not believe that he was living his own life. He was in no rush to accept offers until he awakened his skill. And finally, this day has come. He awakened an F-rank skill called Sphere of Light. Bai Xing was very pleased for a while until he realized several very important things. He was very upset when he realized that this is an ordinary sphere of light, which has absolutely no power and energy and is only able to illuminate. Bai Xing, who was in a world of joy, was still unable to enjoy the opportunities that had opened up before him. However, there was a completely different age in this situation. It appeared that all roads led the young man only to an abyss with monsters. He paved the only way there when he awakened a worthless F-rank skill. The headlines in the newspapers changed dramatically, and people began to treat the young man not very well. Bai Xing could see their sinister looks and not-so-good intentions. The young man seemed to be falling into an empty abyss without the possibility of clinging to anyone. He had no support and heard only a continuous stream of criticism coming his way. Bison's mother became very ill when they were saddled with incredible debts. Their small house was sold at auction, which was able to cover some of the amount. The father had to flee the country because he was threatened by Kim Hookett's company. He took his little daughter with him, separating the brother and sister. Bai Xin, despite all the difficulties, continued to insist on his own and came to the exam every year to become a seeker and pay off the family's debts. The young man was looking at his exam card. Every year he saw his face on a piece of lipstick paper. His power level was 1200. After assessing the situation, Bai Xing concluded that everything was happening exactly the same as in the past, including the familiar girl behind his back. She was dressed in her high school uniform and wore a bow around her neck. When Bai Xing looked in her direction, the girl began to take the sword out of its sheath. The young man looked at his old acquaintance and said in his mind that when humanity will be completely destroyed, only this girl and him will remain. The participants of the exam talked among themselves and stood in groups. Suddenly, a loud screeching sound of microphones was heard throughout the stadium. The contestants immediately turned their attention to the arena and heard one of the examiners turn to them, asking for some of their attention. The woman at the center said that for the exam, the infected were released on the campus, which the participants will need to pass the test. The examiner added that the participants should unite in groups and seal the infected, who will freely walk around the territory of the entire high school. Examiner Xiao Ji stressed that no outside help is allowed, and the trial will be supervised by independent jury members. After that, the woman wished luck to all the participants and announced the beginning of the exam, which was held annually and allowed anyone to become a seeker. After the announcement from the examiner, the participants immediately began to panic and run in different directions. Only Bai Xing stood still and watched the contestants. Many girls immediately rushed to a young man named Chen Zhao. They wanted to be a member of his team as they considered him to be quite a strong unit on the battlefield. One of the squads had asked a young man named Wang Chun to join, as they were just short of a C-rank attack-level team member. The field began to resemble a field for announcements. Everyone tried to find the right participant, and single contestants offered their candidacies. Observer Hu Min looked at the panic of the participants and saw that some had already agreed to form a team earlier, which was quite unfair. Observer Li Jinlin said that it was not prohibited by the rules, so everyone assembles their group as they see fit under the circumstances. Chief Examiner Xiao Tz completely agreed with her colleague. She added that family, friends, money, and power are also components of strength. Xiao Jie was a rather conservative woman who emphasized that the only rule in this exam was to survive and seal the infected. Li Jinlin announced that 95% of the contestants had formed their teams. The woman observed that among them, mainly the abilities of the rank below TS prevail. The observer was not at all surprised by the abilities of the participants, especially since their strength level was mostly below 100. Suddenly, Li Jinlin let out a cry of surprise when she saw a young man with a power level of 1200. She did not understand why such a fighter would even take the exam. Hu Min smiled and pointed his finger at the loser, revealing that not only was he passing the general exam, but he couldn't even find a team. Almost all participants formed their teams, which consisted of about 5 people. The commotion finally calmed down, and the participants felt much more confident. Some contestants still couldn't find a team and approached different teams, begging them to join them, exaggerating their skills as much as possible. The leader of the group denied the blonde his request, since he only had the rank of F. He said that it would be better to have 4 people on the team than such a fool. Bai Xing suddenly approached this loser from behind. He offered to team up together since they were both left without a team. The blonde got very angry and accused the interlocutor of always standing next to him. Bai Xin reminded that the young man only had the rank of F. The interlocutor could not stand such statements on his side and punched his former comrade in the face, repaying him for the insult. Bai Xing flew to the floor after being hit. The blonde turned to the interlocutor and warned him not to come any closer and not to interfere with his search for the team. Bai Xing looked up and looked at the young man with a sinister look. He by no means expected that the blonde would treat him so tactlessly. They used to be friends with the young man because they were from the same village. The blonde even asked his friend to take him with him to the corporation when he became a famous adventurer. However, now, everything was completely different. The friend completely forgot about Bai Sun and only used him to prove his strength to others. Suddenly, the same girl approached the young man from behind. She came down like an angel from heaven and reached for a napkin to wipe the blood from her face. Bai Xin turned his face to the interlocutor and saw a very beautiful girl in front of him. He could not refuse, so of course he took a napkin. Wiping the blood from his nose, the young man began to speak to the girl, advising her to be careful, as she still hadn't awakened her skills. The girl replied that there's no need to worry about her because almost everyone knows that she has absolutely no talent, strength, and any abilities. Bai Xing rose to his feet and said with a smile that no one knows what will happen tomorrow, so there is no need to give up. The interlocutors were forced to quickly stop their dialogue because one of the colleagues came to the girl, who addressed her as Yue Xin. Ma Huzhong was the girl's cousin and had a rank B ability. He asked Yue Xin to read the information about the team he had gathered for the exam. Turning to face the young man, Yue Xin told her new acquaintance that her cousin had hired a group of people so that she could pass this exam. The girl felt very sorry for Bai Xin and asked her cousin if the participant standing behind her could join their team. Ma Huzhong replied that Miss Yue's word was law to him. Yue Xin took a few confident steps forward and thanked her cousin for listening to her. Bai Xing couldn't understand what was going on. He turned to the girl in a quiet and confident voice, asking why she was helping him at all. The young man wanted to get a clear answer to his question, because it was very important to him to know why Yue Xin paid attention to him in the first place. The girl stopped abruptly and turned her head back. She told the interlocutor that maybe she liked him and advised him not to think about this decision for a long time. Bai Xing did not mind at all and immediately approached Ma Huzhong, giving him his exam ticket with a bright smile on his face. Strovan was a little shocked that the young man knew his name. Bai Xing scratched his nose with his index finger and replied that it was the action of one of his skills. He created a sphere between 2 fingers and announced that his orb could illuminate the unknown, and thanks to it, he was able to read the thoughts of the interlocutor. Yue Xin and Ma Huzhong were simply shocked by this turn of events. They were forced to admit that the young man was not such a loser as everyone said about him. Bai Xing finally found his team and could breathe easy. As the clouds drifted slowly across the sky, the teams discussed their plans for the exam. Xiao Jie saw that all possible teams had already been formed, so she asked the teams to start the exam and start searching for the infected in the territory. The teams immediately went in different directions and began to explore the territories. A group of 4 men strode confidently near the central entrance of the high school. The commander of this general was a young man named Chen Zhao who had the rank of C. His ability was lava. His power level reached 37. Another member of the team was a girl named Gray. She had a D rank and the ability to control vines, the power level of which was 12. Liu also belonged to the squad Zhenchu, who looked like a cat. She had a rank of D and a power level 8 stunning stand ability. A girl named Wang Yu Chun acted as a medic in this team. Her abilities were advanced treatment. The girl had a whole level of 28. Chen Zhao stepped forward first and at some point spoke to the charges. The young man said that they should find at least 1 infected here. Gray suddenly interrupted the team commander and, pointing to the right with her finger, reported that she felt some very strange activity in that direction. Liu Zhenchu was very happy to hear this news. She said she wanted to be useful to the team, so she decided to clear the way for the allies. After these words, the girl immediately rose from her seat and jumped forward. She confidently landed on the ground and began to act. As soon as this happened, danger immediately showed its face. Huge plants began to grow from under the ground with incredible speed. Liu Zhenchu decided to wait a bit with her sweep and informed the commander about the danger. Chen Zhao did not expect that his words would come true so quickly. The cat girl was forced to step back as a giant plant grew right in front of her face. All team members were simply shocked. They met on their way a mutated plant called demonic clover. His flower immediately opened like the mouth of a wild beast. Other members of the squad also saw danger behind them. The plants began to throw their roots around very quickly and grow upwards. These were much smaller plants, but the fruits of the same demonic clover. The plant had 4 leaves, between which was the mouth. After a while, Clover's 18 pieces were counted. Gray was forced to admit that there were too many plants, and she wouldn't be able to contain them all. Chen Zhao immediately ordered Liu Zhenchu uses his skill to buy the team some time. The girl immediately obeyed the commander's order. She used her amazing standing coma to hold back the plants. Liu Zhenchu immediately warned the commander that she could restrain the plants for 8 seconds. Chen Zhao replied that this would be quite enough and proceeded to use his skill. He slammed his hands into the ground and used a lava skill. Literally after a second, all the plants began to be covered with lava. Chen Zhao covered the entire space around him with lava to deal with the enemies. The plants began to wither right before the contestants' eyes. The clovers could not stand such a high temperature, so they began to give up their positions. Chen Zhao could exhale after his attack. His team successfully navigated the danger, and the commander asked if everyone was okay. Liu Zhenchu immediately began to examine the dead plants and found the core of the main clover. Chen Zhao was happy as this meant sealing the demonic plant. The squad commander accepted the core of the main clover from the hands of his ward and said that he would definitely give this evidence to the examiners and they would pass the exam. Chen Zhao performed his task as the team leader perfectly and obtained the sealed object. Looking at him, the young man said that human beings will exist forever. Meanwhile, another squad of 5 was still searching for their infected creature. They confidently stepped forward, led by their commander. This was the squad that Bai Xing was a member of. The young man calmly followed his allies, completely unconcerned about the result of this exam. Yue Xin suddenly turned to the young man and advised him to be more careful, because they could run into an infected person at any moment. Bai Xing winked at the girl and told her not to worry, as they could feel safe as long as the B-rank captain was by their side. The young man continued to walk forward and looked at the captain of the team. He wondered if Ma Huzhong hadn't noticed anyone with his skills yet. The detachment commander was not very happy with his search. He told the wards to stay close to him and continue searching the area. Bai Xing knew of an infected that could create an area of infection. The young man carefully looked around as he felt something very uneasy. At the entrance to the unknown door there was a spider, which over a long period of time built a house for itself in a corner, weaving a thick web. Noticing this, Ma Huzhong was immediately alert. His facial expression suggested that the big man had noticed something unusual and not very safe. The team commander turned to Bai Xin and asked his ward if he could use his sphere to provide them with light inside the warehouse. Yue Xin asked if they didn't even have lanterns. After hearing the request from the commander, Bai Xing began to shake incredibly with worry. He almost jumped out of his pants from the realization that someone needed his skill. It was the first time in history, so the young man could not miss such a chance. Bai Xing immediately moved from his seat and took the captain by the sleeve. He happily agreed to light the way until Ma Huzhong was in complete shock. A pleasant smile appeared on the young man's face. He was infinitely satisfied with the development of events because some hopes were placed on him in the team. Bai Xing decided to outrun his allies and go to the formation first. He confidently and quickly stepped forward to light the way for his companions. Suddenly something happened that literally shocked the squad commander and the rest of his wards. They could not believe that danger lurked in such a primitive city. As soon as the young man took a few steps forward, a portal immediately opened beneath them. A huge black substance covered the floor and began to drag the participants. Yue Xin was confused as to what was going on. She screamed loudly, but there was no time to panic. The schedule of events was inevitable. Meanwhile, it was as calm as possible on the territory. There were no participants left here, because each team went in search of its infected target. Observers and the chief examiner were located inside the commentary tower, who made sure that the participants were in their sight. Observer Li Jinlin suddenly noticed that they had lost contact with one of the teams. She assumed that the only infected rank Ts. Xiao Jie reassured the woman and advised her to relax. With a sinister smile on her face, the examiner said that death was a very common outcome of this ordeal. After getting to an unknown warehouse, the team found themselves in complete darkness. Bai Xun immediately used his orb of light skill to see at least something in the darkness. Looking more carefully in front of them, all the members of the squad could see in front of them a huge spider resting in its densely woven web. This terrible animal was called a demonic spider. He had a Chi power rank of level 124, which was quite a significant number for the contestants. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Ma Hujong told his charges to stay put and remain calm, only listening to orders from him personally. Wang Qin was ordered by the captain to control the sounds and prevent the spider from waking up. The young man was able to control sounds and had a power level of 79. Li Jingzhi was also a Qi rank with a strength of 137 as a member of the Aranchid clan. That is why he was ordered to try to subdue this demonic spider. Wan Qin turned to the captain and suggested that he deal with their rookie first, as he would only be a nuisance by getting confused underfoot. Yue Xin took a few steps forward and asked the young man if her cousin had paid them to kill their allies. Ma Huzhong reminded the wards that Yue Xin's words were considered law in their team, so he advised Wan Qin not to say anything else on the matter. The squad commander approached the rookie and told him to stay put. Bai Xing was ordered to stand with his orb in hand and light the way. Li Jingzhi suddenly proposed to hang their partner from the ceiling so that a lamp would emerge from him, intending to use his webs to do so. Everyone in the squad started laughing at the newcomer, including the team leader. Only Yue Xin stood aside and watched her teammates. She wasn't going to join in on their banter. The girl, on the contrary, turned to the young man and advised him to be more careful, because something is wrong here. As soon as she said the last word, she felt a touch on her right hand, in which she held the sword. It was quite unexpected for her. Yue Xin asked the interlocutor what he was doing anyway. Bai Xing continued to hold his ball of light and clarified whether it was a magic sword. Having received a positive answer, the young man reminded that they were both not untalented fighters, so he asked for permission to use the sword to protect the girl like a man. Yue Xin was simply stunned when the sword was snatched from her hands. She felt very uncomfortable, but she didn't mind feeling protected. Bai Xin asked the girl not to pay attention to the fact that he is thin and added that despite this, there is a fire burning in him for everything. While the young man continued the dialogue with the interlocutor, he looked at the ground and noticed that the shadow under his feet was very different from the usual one. Bai Xin waved the magic sword he had just taken from his ally and said that there might be someone hiding in the shadows, and someone must check it out. Yue Xin was simply shocked when the sharp blade of the sword landed a few centimeters from her feet. The young man hit the girl's shadow. Ma Huzhong and his wards immediately stopped mocking the young man. They were simply shocked and immediately thought that he wanted to harm their partner. However, Bai Xing had completely different plans on this account. With an ominous expression on his face, the young man turned to the Ji family member and ordered him to show himself immediately. Yue Xin was simply shocked when the young man spoke the following words. She had by no means expected to see Z with her own eyes, Bi Guanya. Bai Xing grabbed his partner's hand and led her back a little. The young man did not panic at all and confidently watched the shadow where he had just stuck the sword. It turned out that the feeling did not let him down at all. It was just from this shadow that a face began to appear, slowly growing from under the ground. Zhibei Guan grew to his full height from the shadows and addressed the young man, praising him for his cleverness. He admitted that he is indeed an incomplete loser. After that, the man looked at his target with a sinister look and invited him to join him to become a member of a very interesting experiment. Zhibei Guan had a black shadow ability with a power of 817. He asked the young man to give him his power, and in return he promised to pay very handsomely. Yue Xin clutched her face with her hand when she saw Cousin Z in front of her. There was no way she could have expected her brother to appear right here. Bai Xing stood confidently in his place and looked at his potential opponent. He had already encountered a man more than once in his past life. The young man remembered how Zhibei Guan used his spider to taunt the squad members and order the animal to bite off body parts to measure strength. After that, he approached Yue Xin. He mocked the poor girl and said that her father would soon lose his position as the head of the family. After running through these moments in his mind, Bai Xing turned to his opponent and warned him that he would now learn what true humiliation was. He held his orb of light in front of him, powering it with energy. Bai Xun shouted that it was time to finally show his true strength. The team members did not like how their partner started to get angry. They understood that he had to be stopped so that he would not do anything. It turned out that the whole team was on Z's side, Biguanya. Ma Huzhong ordered his men to immediately engage in battle to defeat the enemy. Suddenly, there was silence on the battlefield. The allies looked at each other and calmed down, realizing that they had started to panic too early. Realizing this fact, the soldiers almost choked with laughter. They pointed fingers at the loser and laughed that they had allowed themselves to be scared of him. Bai Xing stood still with his lantern in his hands. Ma Huzhong asked the young man if he had decided to trick them with his second awakening. Suddenly, Z intervened in the dialogue Beiguan. He ordered his charges to shut up immediately, as they had much more important matters to attend to. After speaking his last word, the man immediately used his shadow to catch the victim. Yuexin found herself in the nasty hands of her cousin. Zhe Biguan grabbed the girl by the neck so that she could not run away. Smiling sinisterly in her face, the cousin said it was time for the fun to begin. Yuexin was simply shocked by this turn of events. She looked with a frightened look at her only ally and realized that there was no way out. Realizing this fact, the girl shouted loudly, ordering the young man to run away, because she thought that the opponents would not pursue him and focus on her. Bai Xing was pleasantly shocked by the girl's boldness. He did not expect this from her, but he was in no rush to fulfill her last request. Ma Huzhong had already managed to aim at the young man. He gave him a sinister look and asked if he really thought he could escape. Zdrovan clenched his fist with all his strength and announced that he would agree to let the young man out of this cave if he could withstand his strongest blow. After these words, Ma Huzhong used his stone skin skill and began covering his hand with stones. He did it as quickly as possible and without any hesitation. Literally, after a couple of seconds, his hand was completely petrified and resembled a huge hammer. Bai Xing definitely could not withstand a collision with such a fist. While the big man taunted his worthless opponent, the wards advised him to calm down a bit and first subdue the local spider, which is still in hibernation. Being trapped by her cousin, Yuexin knew that there was no way out of the situation unless she could awaken her ability and defeat the young man. Suddenly, her panicked thoughts were interrupted by Bai Xin. With a smile on his face, the young man said that he would give the girl the opportunity to change her fate. Yuexin was confused as to what the young man meant. She opened her teary eyes wide and was waiting for what was going to happen. Bai Xun was not going to just throw words to the wind. Immediately after the last phrase, he launched the orb he was holding in his hands in the direction of his ally. The ball of light very quickly found itself behind Ma's back. Huzhong. Zdrovan did not understand what was happening. He was definitely not the target of this attack. Zhe Biguan also didn't really understand what was going on. He looked at the young man with a sinister look and ordered him not to interrupt the fun. Seeing the bullet almost next to him, the man used his shadows to build a wall that would protect him from his opponent's surprise attack. However, everything turned out to be much worse than the evil cousin expected. His wall of shadows was easily broken through by an unexplained orb of light. Zhe Biguan was simply shocked to see everything with his own eyes. He could not believe that an ordinary object of light was able to pass through his shadow. The ball of light missed the man on its way and ended up near the girl. Yuexin looked at the object in surprise and did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, a ball of light penetrated directly into the head of the representative of the Z family. The girl did not expect such a turn of events and did not even have time to think at that moment. As soon as the bullet entered her brain, Yuexin immediately felt a surge of strength within her. Her body glowed bright red. Zhe Beiguan was simply shocked to see the following. He understood that it could be the awakening aura. His cousin was able to wake up. Based on the situation, the man immediately understood that Bai Xing could help others awaken, even losers like Yuexin, with the help of his sphere. Zhe Biguan did not hold back his admiration for the boy and offered him to work for him, paying him a high and stable salary. Bai Xing immediately replied that he was forced to refuse the offer, explaining his decision by the fact that he did not really like working for his uncle. In addition, the young man added that the man will soon become a corpse, so I will not wait for the salary anyway. Zhe Beiguan at that very moment felt all the power on him. He pushed his cousin away because she was literally on fire. The man was simply shocked, realizing that she was awakening the gift of fire. Yuexin was by no means prepared for such a life. Literally in a few seconds, she received rank A and the ability to control temperature. The girl could not believe that she had finally woken up. In addition, she received strength as a gift from the owner, which reached 1200. Meanwhile, Bai Xing crouched on a rock and advised his allies not to stand still, because she needed to deal with her cousin who wanted to cut her. As soon as she heard the young man's voice, the girl immediately moved from her place. She sharply turned her body back to attack her former relative. Zhe Biguan was not happy with this turn of events. He took a few steps back and was scared to death because he didn't really want to burn alive. Seeing the expression on his cousin's face, the brother advised the girl to rest a little and familiarize herself with her abilities before using them. The man was just distracting and wasting time until Ma Huzhong came up behind the girl and was about to send her to sleep with a powerful punch. jumped into the air and swung his right hand for a surprise attack. Before the strike, he asked Miss Yue not to hold a grudge against him. Yue Xin reacted completely calmly to the unexpected attack. She noticed the danger in time and turned her face to instantly counterattack the man. With the help of her right hand, she released an incredible wave of fire, which caused the opponent to fall back and burn his stone hands. Zhe Biguan was simply shocked by his cousin's new power. Even he couldn't defeat a B-rank fighter with just one blow. The man realized that he had better not stay long on the battlefield. He used a new cover in the world and began to disappear from sight. Zhe Biguan circled his target for a few seconds and thought about how to get into her back. He understood that the girl's weakness was the distance of the attack. That is why the man moved as far as possible from his rival. After that, he used the shadow knife to surprise attack his cousin. Zhe Biguan was absolutely sure that his plan would work. Before the death of his cousin, he apologized and explained that it was all for the sake of the Z family. Suddenly, Bai Xin decided to intervene in this dialogue. In a thoughtful voice, he asked the man if he thought he was completely safe now. The young man explained that the girl had inherited a power level of 1,200 units from him, as well as an A-rank ability, so Zhe Biguan is definitely not her rival. The man did not agree with this statement and attacked his target with daggers. He shouted loudly that there was no way he would lose a fight to some girl. Yue Xin was far from being a girl now. As soon as she noticed the danger behind her, she immediately counterattacked the opponent with her powerful fire wave. JB. There was nothing Guan could do in this situation. He simply took the blow and screamed loudly, burning alive. Bai Xing was ready to watch this fight forever. The boy really liked how Ji was Beiguan absorbed the girl's blow with his own face. Yue Xin won an absolute victory in the battle with her cousin. Her brother was lying on the ground and burned up with the fire she used to cover his body. After a few seconds, the girl began to lose her fiery cover. Drops of tears appeared on her face, which ran down her cheeks and fell to the ground. Bai Xing decided to help his ally and cover her naked body. He took out a spare set of clothes from his backpack and gave them to the girl to keep her from freezing. Yue Xin looked at her dead cousin and couldn't believe that she had once trusted him with her life and was willing to rely on a man. Bai Xin said that there is nothing wrong with this, because now the girl will be able to protect her family and parents, who are constantly trying to carry out an assassination attempt. Yue Xin was extremely grateful to her savior in this situation. As soon as she said one word thank you, she immediately collapsed on the ground. Bai Xing caught his ally and realized that she was completely exhausted after that. The girl had a very difficult time because before the match, she was not even aware of her strength. The young man suddenly noticed that temperature control was added to his skills in addition to regeneration. He was simply shocked to receive the skill of his charge. He had helped Yue Xin awaken her abilities, and now those abilities had been added to his list, and he even gained 9 points of strength in addition. While the young man was checking his achievements, he was threatened with danger. One of his former partners connected with the spider and attacked from behind. Li Jingzhe flew with the animal at his enemy with happy words that he could kill both opponents as long as the girl was away from the stick. Without wasting time, Bai Xin immediately moved from his seat. The young man took the girl in his arms and took her away from danger at the very last moment. After rescuing his ally and placing her on the floor, Bai Xing asked his opponent why he thought Yue Xin was the only fighting unit on the battlefield. Li Jingzhe shouted back that it didn't matter, because the young man would just say goodbye to his life and take his ally with him. Bai Xing began to quickly analyze the situation. He understood that temperature control used internal energy, causing a great loss of heat. The boy understood that Yue Xin might have passed out from hypothermia. Bai Xing took out a bottle of water from his backpack to use in battle. After that, the young man unscrewed the cap and waved the bottle directly in front of him, pouring out the water. He was going to use the laws of physics to his advantage. By controlling the temperature, he was able to turn water into ice, creating the ice sword. Bai Xing was able to navigate the battlefield very quickly. Taking his ice sword in his hands, Bai Xing began to approach his opponent with a smile on his face. Li Jingzhe continued to move forward. Standing squarely in the face of danger, the young man once again turned to his rival and asked who had told him Bai Xing was going to hide in the first place. Li Jingzhe advised his partner to stay behind him, because he knew that the young man had a trump card up his sleeve to attack. Wan Qin replied that he had already killed several B ranks, so he would be able to deal with this moron in a matter of seconds. Immediately after that, the young man asked his partner to distract the enemy. Li Jingzhe used his poison web to do so at the same moment. Using his spider, the young man spat out a venomous web at the enemy, who stood motionless with an ice sword in hand. Bai Xing did not care at all about his situation and even smiled at this moment. He understood that now he had enough strength to face the enemy. Without taking a single step, Vona simply waved her ice sword, creating a bright blue crescent moon to avoid the poison. His sword immediately met the ends of the enemy's web. The web began to turn wooden and froze just in the air without being able to move. Bai Xun knew that the web was almost 100% protein, so he used this advantage in battle and simply froze it to disintegrate. After that, the young man turned to his opponents and asked the superior if this was all they were capable of, although there was much more talk. Leaving this dialogue behind, Bai Xing moved from his seat and, clutching the ice sword tightly in his hands, said that now it was his turn. Literally in a second, he found himself in front of the face of a giant spider. The young man sharply swung the blade of his sword and immediately cut off two of the spider's legs. Li Jingji was absolutely not happy with this turn of events. He leaned back after his spider was injured and lost his balance. Bai Xing looked at the opponent with a confident look and asked him not to die too quickly. The young man would like to check some things before his rival dies. He swung his ice sword with all his might and struck a powerful blow right at the animal's muzzle, from where it had been releasing a web a few minutes ago. Li Jingzhi kept losing ground on the battlefield. He felt that he could no longer control his spider, as it was completely frozen. After the sword ended up in the animal's head, Bai Xing began to suck the poison out of it, saying that he was very sorry for the unfortunate spider. The young man himself did not expect that his plan would work. His sword absorbed the poison, and now he had a real deadly weapon in his hands. From replenishing with poison, the sword grew several times. Bai Xing could barely hold it in one hand. Almost no poisons were observed in the area of the handle. Instead, the lion's share of it was on the tip of the sword. The weapon was incredibly long and concentrated all its danger on the sharp end. Having carried out his plans, Bai Xing said that he had already experimented enough, so he swung his sword and prepared to send the enemy to the next world. Li Jingzhi was absolutely against such an idea. He dodged the first blow of his opponent and cried out loudly, begging to leave him alive. The young man emphasized that if he died, the control spider would fall, because he was the host of the demon spider, controlling it. Bai Xing stopped suddenly, realizing this fact. He admitted that his opponent was indeed right, and the demon spider should not be left without a master. The young man perfectly understood that Ji Biguan arranged everything to make their deaths look like an accident, so the evidence had to be disposed of. Li Jingzhi only distracted his opponent. Noticing that he thought for a few seconds, the young man immediately decided to act. At the same moment, he disconnected from his spider and loosened his control. Li Jingzhi no longer wanted to continue the battle due to the weakness of the animal. He headed to the rear to his partner, who was preparing to attack. The young man asked his ally how long he would have to prepare for his strike. Wan Qin had almost finished concentrating the incredible amount of sound energy in his hands and announced that there were literally a few seconds left. Bai Xing made a mistake on the battlefield and was left alone with the spider. Now the animal was not controlled by anyone and was completely unpredictable. Also, he was threatened by danger from the young men. Wan Qin finished preparing for his attack and released an incredible sound wave in the direction of his target. A technique called a sound cannon reached the young man's ear. Bai Xing could not do anything about it because it is almost impossible to avoid such a thing. His eardrums had a very unpleasant experience. Blood poured from his ears and the young man fell to his knees screaming loudly from unbearable pain. Wan Qin was very pleased with the result of his attack. He used his technique again and became more and more convinced that all people are in fact the same. After that, Li Jingzhi got up from his seat and headed in the direction of the sword. He planned to finish off the enemy without leaving him any chance of survival. Wan Qin asked his partner to stop and turned his attention to the spider. According to the young man, the animal could do everything without their help. The spider really wasn't going to stay in one place for long. He gasped for air and decided to attack the enemy who had frozen him a second ago. Despite his injury to his eardrums, Bai Xing could still see and move. He noticed the danger in time and made a human shield from his sword. Despite the previous pain, the young man smiled ominously. He said that now he will kill opponents without any hesitation because they do not deserve respect. After creating the ice shield, Bai Xing immediately moved from his place and headed in the opposite direction, leaving the spider alone with its venom. Li Jingzhi ordered his charge to use his technique immediately. Wan Qin began to concentrate the sound wave in his hands to catch up with the opponent. Suddenly, the young man was forced to stop when he saw where their opponent was heading. He couldn't afford to hurt anyone but him. Bai Xing ran towards Captain Ma Huzhong at a very fast pace. Wan Qin deduced that the enemy would threaten them with a hostage. Bai Xing turned to face his opponent and said that he did not need it at all, and on the contrary wanted to help their commander. Using his light sphere, Bai Xing gifted the defeated opponent with 1,200 units of power, certainly not for his own good. The young man planned to repeat the same machinations with Ma's body Hu Zhong, as he did with Yue Xin, from whom he gained additional power points. Zdoravan turned out to be much stronger than the girl and gave the young man 212 points of strength. In addition, Bai Xing received a stone fist at his disposal. Not waiting long, he immediately decided to test his new technique in practice. The young man raised his right hand up and began to form a stone skin on his fist. Bai Xin positioned himself directly in front of the poisonous spider, which calmed down a bit. He swung his fist to warm up the situation above the battlefield a bit. The young man delivered the most powerful blow directly to the animal's head. The spider did not have time to do anything and was crushed by Mu Huzhong's technique. After that, Bai Xing left the stone skin behind and headed for the next target. He was not going to stop at one technique. He very quickly approached his next target, which was much more interesting. Bai Xun created a sphere of light in his right hand and once again gathered to take away the opponent's skill. It was the body of the defeated cousin Yue Xin. Bai Xing sent his sphere at Ji's head at a pace Biguanya to steal the necessary skills from him. The young man liked this schedule of events much more. He now had a black shadow at his disposal, as well as an additional 817 power points. While the enemy was distracted from his business, two allies decided to attack him from behind. Li Jingzhi used the sword and Wan Qin used his sound wave. The partners worked almost perfectly and struck the enemy at the same time. However, he was unsuccessful because the young man used the dark shadow technique. Li Jingzhi was 100% sure that he hit his opponent in the head. Turning his head back, the young man saw a black shadow crawling across the floor. Wan Qin immediately understood that the enemy had copied their cabinet's technique and turned into a shadow. This scared the young man very much because the enemy can copy other people's techniques. He didn't even have time to blink when he was in danger. A black shadow appeared behind the four-eyed man, wishing him good night. Bai Xing absorbed his opponent with absolutely no problem. He now had a sound control skill that was rank C. After that, only one opponent remained on the battlefield. Li Jingzhi began to shake in fear when he heard the voice of his opponent's calm echoing from everywhere. Bai Xing asked his opponent not to worry, because he would die anyway. Before his death, he asked permission from the young man to conduct another important experiment. In case of agreement, the young man promised to send his opponent to the next world very quickly. Li Jingzhi did not like this idea very much and started to run away as soon as he saw the enemy. However, Bai Xing had already set his sights on his enemy. He put his right hand in front of him in the form of a gun and was about to use a combination of abilities. As a basis, he put the skill of a stone fist, which was shrouded in shadow magic. It was the first time Bai Xing had done something like this, but it seemed like every day. After that, he added sound and heat inside to create an incredible projectile. He informed the enemy that this invention would be used against Director Pushkin. Survive anyway. He called his invention the Golden Cannon and directed it in the direction of the enemy. Bai Xing saw Li Jingzhi wanting to avoid death, but warned him that it was impossible. In a couple of seconds, the young man was going to release fire. There was no way for Li Jingzhi to avoid a fatal outcome for himself. The cannon fired an incredible wave of sound and fire, from which it is impossible to dodge. Li Jingzhi was no exception and fell under the incredible power of the combined attack. The young man screamed loudly before meeting his death. At that moment, Bai Xing was in hiding and watching the action of his technique. He was incredibly pleased to see the murderous result with his own eyes. After finishing his business in the infected area, Bai Xing could safely return to the middle school at the same place he had disappeared from. Of course, the young man did not forget to take Yue Xin with him. Bai Xing was pleasantly pleased with how things had turned out. Bai Xun did not leave behind any evidence of the killing and only took the sealed spider as proof that he had successfully completed the exam. The young man was so busy with his own thoughts and affairs that he did not notice that he was not alone in this place and was immediately frightened. Behind him, he saw the examiners, and behind them several other participants. Bai Xing asked what the observers were doing here anyway. Examiner Xiaozi looked at the contestant with a not very satisfied face and asked the young man where Zi was Biguan. Bai Xing was simply shocked. Hearing Zhi's name Biguanya, he immediately understood that it was a conspiracy with the examiner. The young man looked at his ally and remembered how in her past life she had died an unjust death because of her cousin. Bai Xing decided to pretend that he did not know anything and asked the examiner if he was the cousin of this girl because their surnames are identical. Xiaozi walked over to the infected area and surveyed the situation. Baixing was now sure that the woman knew about everything and participated in it. While the young man was thinking about the examiner's intentions, another figure in the form of a large man appeared near the infection zone and shouted loudly. He was running at the head of several other persons in black suits. They were rapidly approaching Miss Yuexin's person, as they were worried about her. A healthy man in sunglasses was the chief butler of the Ji family. Ji Rene decided that the young lady needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. One of the servants of the Ji family named Wang Sai immediately picked up the phone and told the man that he would immediately inform the driver. One of Zi's wards, Rene, took off her black jacket and decided to cover the girl. Liu Feng was the first to take care of the young lady. Suddenly, Bai Xin decided to intervene in this commotion. In a thoughtful voice, he told the people in black not to worry, because the girl was simply overtired. From these words, Zi Rene was very angry. He stood over the body of an innocent young man and demanded from him to explain how it happened to the girl. Xiao intervened in the conversation. Jing. She pointed her finger at the suspicious young man and ordered him to be arrested as he needed to be questioned. Baixing was simply shocked by this turn of events. He expected that he would be met in a completely different way, but it turns out that he became a thief. Liu Feng took off her glasses at the same moment and said that she blocked the young man's movements with her vision, so he would not be able to escape from them. Exam invigilators also decided to join this detention. They didn't like them very much because something like this happened almost every time. Baixing tried to calm the people around him. He asked him not to frighten and not to use his abilities against the innocent teenager. Baixing did not know what was on the minds of these people. He only understood that it was very dangerous for him to come into contact with them, because they are definitely unusual awakened ones. Zi Rene suddenly turned into some kind of werewolf and said that he was ready to bite his throat for Miss Yue because her life was much more valuable than his own. Baixing assessed the situation and realized that the two people in front of him were experienced warriors of rank B or even higher, so even with his current abilities he could not win. Xiao Zi informed that she could get rid of a person who posed a threat to humanity as an examiner, so she advised the young man to tell the truth. Baixing put his hand out in front of him and asked the woman to take the heat. He suggested everyone to calm down and start solving the questions in order. The young man took out the documents and the sealed animal from his pocket, asking the examiner to credit him with the successfully passed exam together with Yue Xin. Xiaozi was in no mood to continue such a dialogue. She immediately used her magical fingers by simply clicking them. Only thanks to this gesture, the woman was able to burn the sheet of paper in the hands of the young man. Baixing is just shocked to see his documents burning. Gritting his teeth, Baixing looked at his potential rival and wondered if she really had such an incredible ability that she could destroy matter. Xiaozi informed the interlocutor that she had enough energy on her fingertips to turn it to dust, so she advised him to tell the whole truth. Zi Rene asked the examiner what would happen to Miss Yue. The woman replied that if the girl survives, then she will get the highest score for the exam, if no one interferes. The man clenched his right fist as hard as he could and said that he did not know what connected the examiner with Jiba Guanem, but he liked that they agreed. But the husband did not like the suspicious young man very much. Zi Rene said that first he would hit him in the face, and then he would listen to the truth. Bai Xin looked at the big man with frightened eyes and tried to understand who he looked like. Now it is clear that he was definitely not joking about the torn throat. Coming out of a very difficult situation, the young man shouted loudly, informing those present that he was ready to tell everything but wanted to stay safe. Under pressure from everyone present, Bai Xing announced that Mr. Zhu Bigan asked him to keep it a secret, even though he wanted to take the school's treasures. Xiao Zi did not really believe the young man because she did not feel the presence of her ally anywhere near. She decided that the young man was not going to tell the truth, so she wanted to tear off his hand. Bai Xing again asked the woman to take her time and immediately told about whose treasures he had in mind. He informed that the treasure in the school is kept by the principal Pushkin. Xiaozi immediately stopped and lowered her left hand. She was literally shocked by the information about the director whose treasures Zi wanted to find Beiguan. An observer approached the examiner from behind and informed the woman that they would not be able to act against the director in the open because he is a member of the Paranormal Association. Observer Li Jinlin joined the dialogue and reported that, based on the latest data, Principal Pushkin is now giving a lecture at another school. Xiaozi began to think that Principal Pushkin was hiding another infected area somewhere in the school grounds, and the Ji family was calling it treasure. Looking at the young man, the examiner decided that Ji Biguan left the teenagers alive because he wanted the kids not to spoil anything. Xiaozi realized that she had failed to live up to her allies' hopes as she lost a lot of time before the representatives of the Ji family had already arrived at the scene. The examiner ordered the young man to immediately lead them to the treasures. Bai Xing was able to get out of the situation without engaging in combat with anyone present. Yue Xin was still unconscious and lying on the floor under her jacket. One of the wards approached the young lady and lifted her up with magic. Wang Sai informed Ji Renee, who is not going to wait for an ambulance and will be able to deliver the young lady to the hospital with the help of his flying ship. Ji Renee ordered his charges, Liu Feng, to go after him and then take this boy and keep him under control until the young lady woke up. Bai Sen looked at his unconscious ally and mentally told her that her wards themselves did not understand where she was being dragged because she would not be safe. Despite this, the young man believed that the girl would be able to stand up for herself, so he believed in their next meeting, when they would be able to overcome all difficulties. After the observer Hu Min wrapped the young man in his tentacles, he was led to one of the classrooms in the school where he was to show something interesting. The participants of the exam immediately noticed how the main loser was being led to the school classrooms. A new nickname stuck to the young man, the King of Lanterns. Bai Xing stepped forward and heard his peers mocking him, assuming that he had been caught for something illegal because he was a complete loser. The young man was not very pleased to hear the contestants conclude that even the loser Yue Xin kicked out an even bigger loser from her team. Bai Xing told the chief examiner that he saw Mr. Zhi Biguan was heading in that direction, so he offered to check Director Pushkin's office right away. As soon as the examiners with the young man as hostages entered the school grounds, Bai Xing immediately stepped onto the shadow and used Zi's skill, Biguanya. He detached the shadow from himself and ordered her to go to the director's office. Hu Min followed the young man but could not see anything. The observer and the hostage quickly reached the office of Director Pushkin. It had a plastic door that was easy to open. Bai Xing was constantly held hostage so that he could not escape. The observer and the examiner constantly followed the young man, who should lead them to something interesting. Entering the principal's office, Xiaozi was simply shocked to see Zi's shadow in front of her, Biguanya. She asked the ally why he was here in shadow form. Bai Xing watched the woman's reaction and was very pleased with his work. In a past life, he had been in Pushkin's office, so he knew everything here perfectly. Remotely controlling his shadow, the young man ordered her to reach for one of the drawers. From there, the black hand took out a statuette of a golden bison. After that, the shadow of the young man threw this figurine in the direction of the woman, who stopped at the door in shock and could not move a single step. She held a statuette of a golden bison in her hands, and they looked at the animal with surprise. She asked aloud what that even meant. As soon as the statuette was in the hands of the examiner, Bai Xing received the sign and shouted loudly, ordering to open the S-class infection zone. Just as those words were spoken, a bright lantern lit up in the middle school grounds, shining more and more with each passing second, emitting more energy. Meanwhile, Principal Pushkin was explaining to students at another university information about the infected zone, which was actually an area controlled by the infected. The man was talking about the fact that the laws of the real world are changing inside this zone. Pushkin drew on the blackboard and reassured the students that the infection zone of rank T was not a threat. However, the man emphasized that if it was a higher-ranked infection zone, it might be poisoned with an unknown poison or hide other secrets. Having finished drawing a coma, Pushkin looked at the students and said that the only way to get out of the infection zone is to kill the boss himself inside. After that, he again touched the chalk to the blackboard and wrote to the head the law for survival in the conditions of the infection zone, to know the laws of the region. Director Pushkin held a lecture at the University of Beijing. Many students gathered in the audience and listened attentively to the prudent man. When the lecturer stopped speaking, one of the students suddenly asked the question whether the reasons given by Principal Pushkin could be related to the recent incident. The student next to her almost agreed with her fellow students. She found it very troubling that the A-rank infection zone really caused a lot of panic. One of the students in the green sweater didn't panic at all, unlike the rest. He scratched his head and asked to explain again, since he did not have time to understand anything. The young man next to him explained to his fellow student that the area of infection does not depend on the level of the boss, but on the level of mortality, and each zone can vary differently. The student continued and added that the infected who create their zones bring in much more money, and all data on warriors above a rank is classified. The young man believed that if the director Pushkin tells them about the A rank, then the infected person no longer foresees a threat, or on the contrary, something very terrible awaits them. Principal Pushkin stood motionless for some time and simply watched the students discuss the lectures. At one point, he clapped his hands and asked for silence. After that, the man informed the students that he was telling them all this so that they would be ready to save humanity and know all the intricacies of the infected. Pushkin reported that the mortality rate in the A-rank infection zone is 80%, and the mortality rate in the C-rank zone will reach no less than 99%. The students were simply shocked to hear the following numbers. This meant that almost no one would be able to survive in this zone, which raised a lot of questions. Suddenly, a girl with dark hair started from her seat. She asked Director Pushkin to tell what was waiting for humanity using her skills. The professor looked at the student and thanked her for the relevant question. The man admitted that he himself cannot fully predict the future of humanity. Despite this, he still dared to assume that in 3 months, the fate of humanity would hang in the balance and depend only on themselves. Meanwhile, strange things continued to happen on the grounds of Hue City High School. The weather around the school suddenly changed, as if the sun had begun to set below the horizon. Bai Xing was very pleased with the way things were going. The zone of contamination from the rank was not an arm's length away from him. The young man missed her very much. Xiaozi wondered what was going on. They got to the infection zone, but no one understood how this happened in the first place. The examiner turned to her ally, Zhi Beiguanya, asked him to explain what was happening and why he threw the gold statuette at her in the first place. The woman even moved from her place when she saw how the shadow began to rapidly approach her. This seemed very strange for the behavior of a representative of the Ji family. Xiaozi absolutely did not expect to see where the shadow was headed. She was just shocked when she saw that the shadow was about to release their hostage. At that moment, the examiner realized that there was not even a trace of Z in this room Beiguyan, and all this commotion was arranged by Bai Xin himself. The young man did not care at all that his secret was revealed. He picked the right moment for his release and was now able to use the shadow cover without cover. Bai Xing began to disappear under the floor with the help of the shadow skill. Xiaozi was well aware of her ally's abilities and immediately ordered to grab before it was too late. Hu Ming immediately followed the chief examiner's order and used his tentacles to grab the young man and restrict his movements as much as possible. Bai Xing continued to move forward and suddenly saw the hideous tentacles in front of him. He was a little scared because he didn't really like sea creatures. Hu Ming was a B-rank warrior, but he did not hesitate to pursue a higher-ranked opponent because his tentacles had an incredible ability to penetrate. Bai Xing realized that he needed to go underground to avoid these tentacles. He used the hidden shadow skill and almost completely sank underground. Hu Ming turned to his opponent and warned him that the tentacles were blocking the aura, so he would not be able to break out of the trap he had fallen into. Bai Xing hid under the floor and asked the enemy if he would not be able to escape this blockade if he went deeper and deeper into the structure. Jinlin suddenly intervened in this dialogue. She informed the young man that he had forgotten about the presence of another enemy who was ready to engage in battle. The observer would have a rank and level of 933, being able to use the Electro Fairy, which carried out absolutely every order of its mistress. Li Jinlin sent her mythical creatures at the young man, and they struck him with a high-voltage shock. Even his shadow did not save Bai Xin. After the young man was electrocuted, Hu Ming took advantage and sent his tentacles towards the opponent to prevent him from running away. Bai Xun was just shocked that his shadow was not helping to avoid the collision. Despite his disguise, the enemy was still able to grab him with their tentacles. After that, the examiner decided to join the match. She confidently stepped on the floor, tapping her heel and catching the shadow of the young man with her shoe. She pointed her hand towards the contestant and asked where he got the Z ability from Beiguanya, warning him about the last chance to save himself. Bai Xing was not very eager to answer this question. He smiled and asked the woman to speak to him a little more tactfully if she wanted an answer. Xiaozi was very angry with the young man. She didn't mind playing games with him, so she used her skill to end him once and for all. Bai Xing had no chance to escape in this situation. Despite his predicament, he continued to smile as he endured the pain. As soon as the shadow of the young man began to disappear, all his skills came out. Sound waves, as if from a cannon, went in the direction of the opponents. Literally, the whole room was filled with unbearable sounds that reached the eardrums of the people present in the room who did not understand what was happening. The observers tried to cover their ears, but nothing helped at all. Blood poured from their ears, severing the eardrums inside. Xiaozi was also affected by the sound wave, but she continued to think about the hostage. She ordered that he be caught immediately because he could not go far after her attack. Suddenly, a giant figure resembling a monster appeared on the battlefield. This man advised the woman to take better care of herself in this situation. Z was a new figure on the battlefield, Renee, who was increasingly turning into a dinosaur. He assessed the situation and understood that he was in the zone of contamination of at least rank B. The man was not going to stay here for long because he needed to protect the young lady who was in the hospital. Xiao Zi was simply shocked by the size of the man. Z Renee pushed himself off the ground and then off the wall, leaving the building. The assistant followed him and tried to catch up with her boss. Xiaozi realized that this representative of the Ji family might know something. The family's skills were unique, which is why she decided to help Ji Guanyu to become the head of the family. The examiner ordered the observers to immediately follow the foot and mouth disease and find a way out of the infected area, as there was no need for them to linger here any longer. Meanwhile, the students were outside and noticed very strange weather. They had a bad feeling because the evening was still very far away. One of the students believed that it would simply be the second stage of the exam. His classmate denied this and said that most likely an infection zone had formed inside the school. At the top of the school was a young man who managed to escape persecution. He had to use the rebirth skill to stay alive. Despite this, he was still left without a left arm. Bai Xing was not going to back down from his goal so easily and promised that he would definitely win. An ominous smile appeared on his face, and he warned Director Pushkin that in 3 months he would lose because the young man would reach him first. All students were in absolute shock from what was happening. This trouble did not escape the team led by Chen Zhao. The bravest contestants began to panic when they realized that the school was surrounded from all sides and they had no way out of this infected zone. Chen Zhao became very worried about his situation. He looked at the students and thought of using them to save himself. It was important for the young man to survive at any cost. He interrupted the dialogues of absolutely all the students and asked for some attention, as well as peace. Chen Zhao said that he had secret information, that it was all part of the test, and the examiners would watch how they could survive. The young man put himself in the role of a leader. Although his abilities were at the level of, he held his fists up and promised that they would not regret calling him their commander. Liu Zhenchu immediately supported her commander. She told the students how they were able to easily seal a huge clover with the help of the captain. A young man named Zhang Mao was rank B and wanted to be the leader as well, but Chen Zhao had overtaken him, so he decided to sit back quietly. Chen Yin suddenly joined the dialogue and said that he had heard a lot about the potential leader, but wanted to see his skills in real life. Chen Zhao understood that the students really needed to see his skills. The leader agreed that everyone should know each other's approximate abilities. The young man slammed his fist on the ground and created a huge wave of lava, demonstrating his ability, which he successfully used during the test. Chen Zhao explained to his potential charges that he could only use a technique like this once, but its power and range made up for the number. As soon as the young man began to explain, a huge bull hit him in the back. It was very unexpected, especially for a young man who wanted to survive. Liu Zhenchu was just shocked to see the captain's death with her own eyes. Other students also did not hide their thirst and surprise at this situation. They could not believe that their future leader had died from a single blow. Students began to assume that with this rule, they would lose absolutely everything. Chen Yin tried to understand what their would-be leader had done wrong. The students did not have enough information to understand the course of events. Liu Zhenchu fell to her knees in front of a pool of blood and spoke the captain's name. She still couldn't believe that Chen Zhao left this world so suddenly. While the girl examined the blood of the dead young man on her hand, the monster was not going to wait and was already approaching its target at an incredibly high speed. The students did not even have time to warn the girl about the danger. Her blood stained their faces in a split second, stained with horror for that matter. The bull did not stop in his place and continued to move forward. On his way, he knocked down 2 more students who were standing still and watching the action. Meanwhile, Bai Xing was on the roof of the high school, looking at the students who could do absolutely nothing with the mad bull. The young man was forced to admit that in the face of death, absolutely all skills are powerless. Bai Xing added that there are only 2 sides to the world. From his past life, he knew that in 3 months, Pushkin would release this enchanted bull, and in a year, the population of the city would fall several times. It was a colossal danger for the entire population, but no one knew anything. Only Bai Xing remembered how the bulls destroyed absolutely everything in their path. The young man could not simply forget when the last blow of this giant bull turned the city into a vast desert, where even the smallest grass stopped growing. Bai Xing continued to stand on the roof of the high-rise building and watch the suffering of the school students because he understood that he would hardly be able to help them. Meanwhile, students literally fought among themselves. They could not share the free road because everyone wanted to escape to a safe place as soon as possible. Some students literally went crazy and started picking on female students. They decided that these were the last seconds of their lives, so they wanted to enjoy them to the fullest. Some students simply fell down on the floor and began to pray to God. They wanted to survive at any cost, but they perfectly understood the seriousness of the situation. Bai Xing continued to be on the roof of the school and observed this phenomenon. He thought about how he could influence a large-scale change in the environment. The figurine he threw towards Xiaozi was called a golden bull. Any color changes in this buffalo's eyes caused incredible wrath and showed its power. Bai Xing knew perfectly well that in the bull's eyes, there is absolutely no difference between a living and an inanimate object, so it will attack anything that can change color in one way or another. Despite the danger, the young man decided to finally jump off the roof. He thought about a plan how he could deal with an incredibly strong animal. Falling down, Bai Xing suddenly remembered that he could use thermal control. He put his hand out in front of him and organized a fall for himself. With the help of his skill, the young man instantly heated the air under his feet, using the expansion of molecules. He perfectly understood that it was necessary to be as careful as possible. Bai Xing successfully landed on the ground. He understood that for a giant bull, his skill would be as attractive as possible, because the animal reacts to a change in color. Also, the young man perfectly understood that he had to be careful with the change of color, and even the skill of shadow transformation could have fatal consequences. Looking around, Bai Xing noticed that it was already getting dark for me considering the early hour. The sudden change in weather could also affect the mortality of people. Bai Xing continued to ponder the plan, closing his eyes and clutching his hand. He hoped that there would be no clouds today that could interfere with the temperature. After standing still for a while, the young man moved from it and headed down the stairs with the hope of finding his friend Yue Xin and saving her. At the stadium where it all started, there were several squads who did not know what to do. Everyone was a bit puzzled by the fact that it started to get dark much earlier. Ji Renee, dressed as a dinosaur, was approaching a van parked outside the school. Liu Feng followed her boss and could not catch up with him. The woman was visibly tired, trying to keep up with her leader. At the last moment, she asked him to wait because at this rate, she could no longer continue. Liu Feng asked the captain if they were going to capture that boy. It seemed very strange to the women that they headed in a completely different direction. Zi Renee reminded his assistant that they were the direct descendants of the head of the family and had to worry about Yue Xin, so they had to think ahead sometimes. Liu Feng asked if it wasn't him who was going to finish off the young man on the spot. Ji Renee replied that the young man had saved the young lady's life, so for now, he would just be watched. Liu Feng, according to the rules, his glasses and mentally agreed with his boss. She understood that the young master would be able to take care of himself without any help. An ominous smile appeared on Hope's face at the thought that Bai Xing would kill himself and thereby clear the way for Mr. Guan. Zi Renee was at the van in a few seconds and knocked on the back door. He did it as gently as possible and asked how the young lady was doing. Wang opened the back door of the van. Sai informed the bodyguard that Yue Xin is still in a coma. The doctor said to wait a little. Wang Sai looked sideways at the assistant standing behind the leader. He was ready to act at any moment. Liu Feng looked at the man with the same incredulous look. She understood that he could be hiding something because he refused to explain something again. Wang Sai planted a bomb just under the van to deal with his enemies. He calculated everything and considered the bomb to be enough for those present to fly to the sky. The man held an energetic flash of light behind him. He had the ability to control the energy of the light with which he was going to blow up the van. Wang Sai wanted to do it out of his own convictions, because he believed that Ji Beiguan will be able to give him much more power if he kills his cousin. Before blowing up the car, Wang Sai mentally apologized to the young lady for his actions, explaining that he also wanted a better life. As soon as the man was about to clench his right fist, someone present suddenly came up to him and grabbed his hand, stopping the girl's almost inevitable death. Liu Feng was able to stop her alleged ally in time. She told him to wait and explained that some more people appeared on the horizon. The examiner came to the van together with the observers. She said that she needed the boss of this unit because this area is too difficult to work. Xiaojing understood that if Guan was here, then they would be able to directly ask for help even though Yue Xin was still alive. The woman was at a crossroads and did not know what to do. On the one hand, she wanted to finish her goal on the spot, and on the other hand, she could interfere with the plan of one man. Ji Renee sharply replied to the woman that they would not cooperate with them until the young lady was absolutely safe. Xiao Jing immediately decided to propose her candidacy for this. She said she knew a way to save the girl's life and would share it with him if he cooperated. Renee did not expect such a turn of events. Even his animal face showed that the man was very surprised to hear the words about the safe zone. Xiao Jing explained that the power attached to her fingers belonged to a very respectable man, and her true ability was the void backpack. Absolutely everyone present was simply shocked to hear such information. It was a very rare ability that allowed even a living person to be hidden in a backpack. Even Hu Min did not know about the ability of the woman he had been working with for many months. He asked her why she hadn't shared her powers before. Renee assessed the situation twice and decided that if he gave the woman the opportunity to escape calmly, young lady would also be safe. Xiao Jing asked the monster if he wasn't interested in learning more about the infection, and the young lady would always be with them and be safe. Renee answered that knowledge is sometimes superfluous and can even frighten. The man also added that knowledge is not all that is needed for their victory. The man emphasized that there are too many infected now, and the best solution would be to turn them against each other, which would be an effective way out of the situation. Xiao Jing replied that she only had enough space in her backpack for 2 or 3 people, so more than half of those present would encounter the infected. Renee pointed his paw at the van and told the woman that when danger comes, she must first of all save the young lady. Xiao Jing agreed to these conditions and put forward her own. She said that first they need to get all the students together to search for information. Renee reminded that the more people gather in one place, the greater the probability of compliance with the rules of infection, so it is necessary to look for other methods. The man decided that they needed information from the dead. He turned to his ward and asked him to use his vision to conduct a detailed analysis. Liu Feng immediately took off her glasses and used her vision, which allowed her to mark people and follow them at a certain distance, calculating the tracks. Xiao Jing did not really want to cooperate with this monster, because she considered him a fool who could easily put his life on the responsibility of other people. The woman approached her charges and told Li Jinlin to gather all the information about the students, while Hu Min was tasked with grabbing the person with the tentacles. Xiao Jing was a very cunning woman and did not want to search among the dead for a long time. She was going to use live bait to speed up the process. Li Jinlin took her tablet and immediately called out the name of the first A-level candidate named Yin Xiao Xiao, who was not far from them. Bai Xing was behind the wall and used his colored hearing to eavesdrop on the dialogue. He considered it ruthless to grab students to test the rules of the contamination zone on them. The young man now did not care about the lives of other students. He focused on saving Yue Xin, but it turned out to be much more difficult. Suddenly, Bai Xing saw a suspicious shadow behind him and immediately turned his face back to face the danger in battle. It turned out that it was an ordinary student. She immediately jumped back and asked the young man not to kill him because she would be useful to him. Without giving up, Bai Xin asked the interlocutor what she could offer him, emphasizing that she had only one attempt. The girl introduced herself as Yin Xiao Xiao, which I caught after 17 seconds, and offered to use her as a bait to learn the opponent's abilities. Bai Xing was just shocked to hear this information. He could not understand how the girl learned this information and asked how she had the power. He grabbed the stranger by the throat and demanded to explain what was happening. Yin Xiao Xiao took her time to explain and said that there was 1 second left. Ming's tentacles surrounded the students and targeted the girl who was actually already trapped. Bai Xing quickly got his bearings and understood what he needed to do. He decided to explain to his opponents that ignoring him would not lead to anything good. The young man decided that the examiner had left him no other choice. At the moment when the tentacles almost enveloped the girl, the sign decided to transfer its power to her. Literally in a second, the tentacles lost their power as the girl's internal energy increased manifold and she was now not so defenseless. Yin Xiao Xiao gained plus 500 energy level when Bai Xing rewarded her with power. Now the girl had the ability of psychological searches and a power level of 796. Hu Min also received additional power points to his arsenal and did not understand what had happened. His body suddenly began to feel much better. As soon as Bai Xing connected with his opponent with the help of his tentacles, he smiled sinisterly and said that it was time to redo. Hu Min suddenly felt his energy level reach 0. Absolutely all his strength was drained from him by some unknown energy wave. Bai Xing released the poor girl after this technique and left her energy level at 296. Yin Xiao began to lean back in exhaustion. After the tentacle master was rendered powerless, Bai Xing stepped forward and stood on one of its limbs, pinning it to the earth. After that, the young man directed a stream of his dark shadow at the tentacle and apologized to the man for having to give his life just now. Hu Min lay helpless on the ground and could do absolutely nothing. The women standing over him were simply shocked when they saw a familiar shadow on the man. Z Rene did not understand what was happening at all, but he suddenly saw danger in the form of a bull and shouted loudly, warning his allies of the danger. The man quickly got his bearings and decided to save the young lady. He lifted the entire van onto his shoulders and jumped into the air to avoid a collision. The golden bull was very rapidly approaching in the direction of its target. He saw absolutely no obstacles and only saw the target changing its color. Literally, in a fraction of a second, the wild animal had already entered the battle and spilled blood on the battlefield, taking the life of one of the men standing in front of him. Xiao Zi was simply shocked to see the death of her ward with her own eyes. She understood that this animal should be treated with the utmost seriousness. Realizing that there was absolutely nothing she could do against the bull, Xiao Zi opened her briefcase and decided to hide inside for a few minutes. Meanwhile, Bai Xing was just starting his party. The boy put his fingers in front of him in the form of a gun and was about to use his golden weapon again. He assembled an incredible stone creation that he had practiced in his first battle. The golden cannon formed much faster this time. Bai Xing began the countdown and very quickly counted to 1. After this number, the cannon fired a huge sound wave and hit everything around. A loud explosion rang out on the battlefield and people scattered in different directions. They didn't understand what was going on. Their lives hung in the balance. As soon as the bull saw a huge explosion on its way, it immediately headed in the direction of the light because its eyes changed color very suddenly. After firing his cannon, Bai Xing extinguished it with a breath of air and turned back, asking the girl behind her if she liked the performance. Yin Xiao sat on the ground and silently watched the young man's actions. She was simply shocked and did not understand what was happening around her. The girl was lying on the ground and could not believe her eyes. She was simply stunned by how quickly the young man was able to find his way around. Bai Xing was able to form an incredible plan for a counterattack in a matter of seconds. It was almost impossible in such a situation, but he was able to. Yin Xiao remembered how the young man had simultaneously transferred energy to her and taken her away in just a few seconds. After that, one of the examiners lost consciousness and was covered by a shadow. With this, the young man forced him to apply the rule of the zone. As the golden bull collided with the examiner, powerful energy projectiles hit the target, guaranteeing the man's death. Right after his first attack, Bai Xing hid the next one and created his golden cannon, firing it within half a second. The projectile prevented others from coming to help, and the light layer quickly penetrated Liu Feng's body, stealing her abilities. The immense temperature caused the earth to change color, turning the bull's attention. Bai Xing calculated everything so that no one would have time to come to help. Yin Xiao was simply amazed at the quick reaction speed and ruthlessness that the young master battle displayed against multiple opponents at the same time. In addition, Bai Xing knew the rules of the zone very well and manipulated them, which could not help but please the girl because it directly affected her future life. Suddenly, Bai Xing turned to face the girl and asked her to praise him more. He said those words weren't enough for him to continue saving her life. Yin Xiao was simply shocked to hear these words addressed to her. She immediately understood that the young man had read her thoughts because he had taken over her ability. Bai Xing raised 2 fingers of his right hand and confirmed every word the girl said in her mind. He had mastered her skill a few seconds ago. Yin Xiao literally exploded with surprise and shame. She couldn't believe that all her secret thoughts would now be shared with this young man. Bai Xing mentally turned to the girl and asked her to calm down a little. He said that he would have finished her a long time ago if he didn't need her. The young man needed a person who was able to communicate silently with him at some distance. Yin Xiao was very well suited for this due to her skill. Bai Xing knew that the situation would backfire on him anyway, so he offered the girl to cooperate to help others survive. The young man took a few steps forward and placed his hand on the girl's head, not giving her the stone fist ability and 1,000 energy points. Yin Xiao couldn't believe what had just happened. She began to grab her head and finally realized that she had become several times stronger. Before the girl felt herself completely, Bai Xing waved her hand and asked her to hurry, because time was definitely not on their side right now. The young man turned to face the girl and, looking at her with serious eyes, warned that he would know about her location, so she would not be able to escape. Yin Xiao smiled pleasantly and replied that she wasn't even going to run away. She agreed to obey every order from the leader without question. The girl was very happy to be able to save her classmates. She immediately got up from her seat and ran to look for opportunities for rescue. Literally in a few seconds, the young man told his partner about his plans. Frost Xiao Xiao was surprised at what an incredible mind he had. The girl was very pleased with their cooperation and ran forward, intending to use a psychic search to find life in a certain area. Bai Xin could literally read his partner's thoughts and was pleasantly surprised at how nice she is to him. Cooperation turned out to be successful at first glance. Meanwhile, Z Rene and his dinosaur guys was finally able to rest and put the car back in place after the Golden Bull disappeared from the radar. Doki G. Rene ordered to report the situation to management. Wang Sai looked at the pool of blood in front of him and could not believe Liu Feng's death. Suddenly, the dinosaur turned his attention to a familiar voice to his left. A voice told the men to calm down as their allies were still alive. Bai Xing slowly approached the men and announced that one of the examiners was in the void backpack, referring to Xiao Jing. Z Rene immediately turned to face the young man and ordered his charge to follow him to the van to take care of the young lady inside. The dinosaur wanted to get even with the young man. Bai Xin slowly crouched down and placed his hand on the earth, warning his opponent not to act rashly. The young man added that he can, in a few seconds, cause normal attacks, which will be much more powerful than those that could be observed a few minutes ago. Warming up the temperature of the ground beneath him, Bai Xing decided to use voice control and explain Zi's situation to Rene, who was on his side. The man listened intently to the voice in his head, informing him of Zi's intentions. Beiguanya, who wanted to kill his sister, and her father, taking the throne of the head of the family. Z Rene did not even listen to the information about the bomb under the car and rushed to attack the young man. He wanted to deal with the suspicious guy first and then investigate the rest. Bai Xing certainly didn't really want to engage in a duel, but he had no choice. In addition, there was a very good opportunity to test your new skills. Absorbing Hu Ming's body, the young man took his C-suction skill. In 1 second, he released several tentacles from his severed arm. Meanwhile, Z Rene continued to charge at his opponent and delivered a powerful blow with a giant paw, swinging from behind the head. Bai Xing took advantage of his opponent's weakness and caught him in a mistake. He took a small step to the right so he could use his tentacles. A huge hand of a dinosaur was trapped. Z Rene was by no means expecting such a turn of events, and was simply shocked when he was unable to move. Despite this, the dinosaur continued to press, which the young man felt on himself. Bai Xun knew very well that he would not be able to withstand this monster in close combat. Z Rene, not easing his pressure, turned to his opponent and asked if this was all he managed after his bold words. Bai Xun understood his hopeless situation, as he could not use other skills as they were against the rules of the zone and would put him in a more difficult situation. The young man got his bearings very quickly and glanced at the man who was near the van. He had a very good plan in mind. Bai Xing convinced Wang Sai that he was on his side. He said that Ji Beiguan asked him to get as close as possible to Yue Xin. Z Rene realized at that moment that the young lady was in danger. He immediately turned to face the man and thought he needed to be stopped. Wang Sai was just shocked to realize that Bai Xing was on their side. He immediately agreed to carry out the order he received from the boss. The man used his light energy. A satisfied smile appeared on his face at the realization that Zhi Beiguan still did not abandon him. Z Rene was not going to stay in one place for long. Noticing that the young lady was in danger, the dinosaur immediately headed in the direction of the man. He grabbed his supposed ally by the body, lifting him up. Wang Sai had not expected such a speed and was absolutely unable to do anything in this situation. The dinosaur squeezed its victim with all its might, leaving several holes in its body. Wang Sai spat out blood from the damage to his internal organs, would park the car at any cost, even if he had to say goodbye to life. At the moment when Wang Sai was trapped by the dinosaur, Bai Xing took advantage of the situation and fired his ball of light at his ally's head. He took away the man's abilities and left him without energy. The dinosaur threw away its victim, realizing that the man was no longer capable of anything. As soon as his body flew into the air, the golden bull immediately reacted to him. He noticed the change in temperature and immediately aimed straight at the man. Z Rene looked down at his hand and turned to the young man, realizing the fact that he had forced him to kill the man, leaving him no choice in the situation. Bai Xing used a voice transmission and told the dinosaur that he didn't care if he died or not, even if he saved the young lady's life. The young man stood behind his opponent and invited him to play, but before that he asked him to listen carefully to every word he said. Bai Xing released more tentacles from his left hand and said that there was no safe place at all now, unless it was a pocket briefcase. Picking up the body of the victim on the ground, the young man informed his opponent that Guan was already dead, so he should not repeat his case and get on a slippery path. Bai Xing warned the opponent that they should treat flowers and plants with care and generally protect the environment from danger. The young man lifted Li Jinlin's body, enveloping her with his tentacles. The woman was simply shocked when she realized that her ability had suddenly activated. Bai Xing continued to squeeze his victim with the help of tentacles, draining all his strength from him and giving him no chance to save himself. A sinister smile appeared on the young man's face, and he replied to the woman that now it was not her ability, but his. Bai Xing obtained a rank B electric current skill. While Bai Xing replenished his skills, the other examinees tried to deal with the conditions of the contamination zone by any means. A young man named Qian Tian took out a banknote from his pocket and told someone that he would use this infected banknote to get the protective film. He placed the bill on his forehead and shouted that he was now protected by a monetary protection that even the most vicious bulls could not break. A bright green aura began to form around the young man. The other contestants stood behind him and silently watched what would happen next. Qian Tian was incredibly pleased with his bill's reaction. He realized that his plan had worked and now he could leave the infected area. As soon as the young man spoke his last words, misfortune overtook him. The golden bull reacted to the change in light and pierced the victim with its horns. The students even jumped back a few meters when they saw the blood of their friend. They did not expect that death would be so merciless to him. Chen Yin couldn't believe that his comrade had died so easily. He used a very expensive artifact to get out of here, but still said goodbye to life. Zhengmu remembered how Chen Zhao used the bench, and Peng Chen turned the land into a lake and realized that the rules forbade changing the environment. The young man remembered that Chen Zhao splashed his blood on the two students behind, and the golden bull killed them as well, so it was impossible to change the color. Wang Tao used his mobile phone to call for help, but he was killed just as the screen on his gadgets lit up. Sloth Go Hao decided to use her ability and turn into a bird to fly away from the infected area, but was killed. Wang Lei wanted to do something similar and use the invisibility technique, but it did not help him. The bull came up behind the young man and pierced him through. Zhang Mu understood roughly what was going on, but there were too many rules to understand them all. This alarmed the young man very much. Chen Yin was also of the same opinion. He was ready to give up, because even a person who turned into a bird could not fly away from here. Zhang Mao was literally going crazy with these rules. He couldn't understand if the right was getting bigger or if they just didn't understand the point. Suddenly, someone's hand landed on the young man's face. One of the students decided to end Zhang's panic, Mao covering his mouth. Chen Yin told everyone present to just keep quiet if they wanted to survive. The young man added that there is absolutely no need to cause any changes and use abilities. Chen Yin voiced the worst guess Zhang had in his mind, Mao. Both young men agreed that there could be more and more rules. Zhang Mao broke free at one point and shouted loudly that they wouldn't survive anyway, as the no-breathing rule would come up at some point. Chen Yin asked his friend not to joke like that. His face looked very scared, but he tried his best not to panic. Zhang Mao, on the other hand, succumbed to his emotions and fell to his knees with a loud cry. He admitted that they could not defeat this bull and would die on the spot. Students began to succumb to their vis-a-vis emotions and calculate rules from which it is impossible to escape. They thought that this was their end. Chen Yin suddenly walked up to the panicking young man and slapped him on the shoulder. He ordered to gather forces and named the only specific rule that must be followed: the prohibition of color change. Suddenly, both young men were a little scared when they noticed a stranger behind them. They immediately glanced to the right to check. It was Yin Xiaoxiao, who came to the largest crowd of students. She introduced herself as the strongest A-rank mind reader among the current students. The girl made several confident years ahead and said that only she can save the lives of students, so you need to listen to her carefully. Yin Xiaoxiao revealed that she can read other people's minds and also has a well-developed sixth sense, giving her an edge over others. The girl added that she was able to feel the murderous intentions in the panic, and using large-scale searches, was able to find something very interesting. Chen Yin visibly sweated after these words and asked the girl to tell everything. Yin Xiaoxiao got up and asked to behave more quietly. After glancing at the interlocutors, the girl spoke about Bai Xin as a person who is able to look into the past and the future and wants to destroy humanity. Zhang Mo was just shocked to hear such skills. He asked the girl if such a person really existed and they would have to fight him. Yin Xiaoxiao couldn't stand being interrupted. She got mad at the boys and told them to shut up so she could finish in peace. The girl added that Bai Xing had completely abandoned his humanity and prepared a plan to destroy the entire world, so someone must stop him. Yin Xiaoxiao decided to pass on her knowledge to the students and placed her finger on Zhang's head Mao to share his observations from the past. She earned the same with Chen and M. Thanks to her psychological transmission, the girl was able to share everything she experienced with Bai Xin. The boys were simply shocked when they saw the girl's memories. Yin Xiaoxiao added that now Bai Xing can also read minds, so they won't be able to hide information from him. Despite this, the girl was not upset, as she believed that strength does not completely depend on the level of energy and the number of abilities. Yin Xiaoxiao emphasized that by focusing her powers in her head, she could create a vicious circle to deceive their common enemy. The girl knew that Zhang Mu can use energy channels to launch Chun's energy bombs. Yin can hold the breath for a few seconds to increase the amount of oxygen in the body. According to the girl, these abilities will be very useful. Despite the promising plan, the young men did not agree because their enemy could read minds. Yin Xiaoxiao explained that she would take care of the order of thoughts in their heads, and they would be able to use the abilities as they gradually learned about them. The girl also learned that air is compressed from Cheninome into two spheres, pumping oxygen from one and not giving the opportunity to penetrate further. Yin Xiaoxiao concluded by saying that she had chosen people who were very useful to her, so she invited them to continue their journey and save all mankind. Despite some doubts, the young men were forced to agree because they did not want the students to continue to be used as a flower field where evil is cultivated. The allies clenched their fists and raised them up, agitating for everyone to fight Bai Xin. To begin with, they needed a perfect plan, as well as a perfect execution. Yin Xiaoxiao was able to escape Bai Xing's influence with her skills. She simulated in her imagination the psychological deviations that made the young man believe the girl. Yin Xiaoxiao created a closed circle in her mind where all attention was focused only on the young man. She prayed to his portrait and was ready to live with him until the end of her days. The girl called all students food for the main character on the battlefield. She was ready to help him despite the countless number of victims. Yin Xiaoxiao even bent the staff slightly, but it looked quite believable. She seemed to have fallen in love with the young man and was ready to do anything for his sake. At this moment, Bai Xin was reading the thoughts of his new partner. He was simply shocked and wanted to leave the girl's head as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the young man was in front of the dinosaur and was thinking about what to do with the woman who should appear very soon from his portal. Bai Xin was already tired of waiting. He did not expect that the examiners would be much more prudent and would not appear in such a difficult situation. The young man decided to leave everything to Ji Rene. He said goodbye and asked the man to protect Yue Xin and kill the examiners, even if the test was passed. After speaking his last sentence, Bai Xing took a few more steps forward and then used a T-level energy beam to get out of here. The young man aimed at the mountain of the multi-story school and caught his beam on the iron structure that was on the very roof of the school. After that, Bai Xing firmly grasped the energy beam and rose into the air. Ji Rene remained standing on the ground and guarding the young lady. The man could not understand why the young man had hidden his sinister abilities until then. In his opinion, he could easily deal with everything on his own. Ji Rene suddenly assumed that the young man might just be testing him, so he decided to show him how strong the representatives of the Z family could be. At the moment, the man knew that the examiners were with Ji Bei Guanam, who had already died, and was seriously determined to seize the throne of the head of the family. Yue Xin was still unconscious and under the care of a doctor. Ji Rene caught a nurse on the way so that the young lady was under constant supervision. Suddenly, the dinosaur's thoughts were interrupted by a portal behind him. Ji Rene cast his gaze back and noticed something strange happening. Xiao Zi finally decided to show up in the real world again. She came out of her briefcase safe and sound, overcoming the danger in the field. She was not wearing any outerwear, and the woman joked that she wanted to go to the beach after passing the exam, but forgot to bring a change of clothes. The examiner immediately turned to the dinosaur and asked, after what happened to Ji Rene will be opposed to join their forces against a common enemy. Xiao Zi understood that she needed to sway the Ji family to her side. Otherwise, her position would be critical, and she would not be able to win. Ji Rene decided to accept the woman's offer and asked to put the young lady in the briefcase so that they could not dwell on her and focus on the battles. Xiao Zi expressed her undisguised surprise that the Ji family turned out to be very intelligent people who could think clearly in such a situation. Ji Rene replied that there was no doubt about it. The dinosaur looked at his new partner and began to think how to solve this problem. A large crowd of students gathered in the stadium discussing the identity of Bai Xin. Some called him a true genius who saved their lives. Some, on the contrary, considered him more of a polluter than a savior. They wanted to make him their slave so that he would not dare to threaten humanity again. Yin Xiaoxiao was close to the students and read their minds. She would like the students to behave completely calmly and think the same way. The two main figures whispered to each other that as soon as Bai Xing appeared here, they would immediately declare the contaminated bodies in his body, and they would all attack him. Xiao Xiao was pleased with the students' opinions. She admitted that her allies were indeed quite capable considering their hidden abilities. Yin Xiaoxiao also played along with the allies and called Bai Xin a true genius before saying that they needed to destroy the young man as soon as he noticed the pollution. Bai Xing was put up for auction by its wealthy owners. After that, Director Pushkin bought him when he noticed the young man's talent. At first, the boy hoped that the director would help him, but everything turned out to be completely different. He was chained to a laboratory table and began to set up experiments. The young man saw above him the figure of the director, who apologized for the cruel treatment of the human body. He explained that he simply could not miss such an opportunity. After these words, the old man picked up a scalpel number 20. The tool with this number was used to cut the skin. Opposite the director stood a nurse who helped him with the dismemberment. Pushkin told the young man not to be afraid, because very soon, everything will end. As soon as he said this, he immediately began to cut open the young man's body. With a scalpel under the number 20, the director cut the chest of the young man and let the blood out. Bai Xing felt excruciating pain and screamed loudly. After that, he lost consciousness, and when he woke up, his body was no longer like himself. Director Pushkin, with his scalpel under different numbers to dismember the body, the director needed the young man's skills. Bai Xing opened his eyes and saw in front of him a man handing over an internal organ to his assistant and saying that all organs should be kept separately. The woman took the internal organ in her hands and threw it into a tank of clear green liquid. It turned out to be the heart, from the loss of which an ordinary person dies. However, Bai Xing was still alive. His internal organs were completely removed from his body, and Pushkin forced him to watch the dismemberment. After there was nothing left in the young man's stomach, the director approached his right hand and said that it was time to proceed to the most important organ. After the man, a nurse approached the patient and grabbed his hand. She promised to hold tighter so that they would need God's hand in the future. Pushkin left the laboratory for a few minutes and asked the ward to take care of sealing all parts of the body so that the abilities would not pass to others after death. As soon as the director left the room, Bai Xing immediately turned to his assistant with a sad expression on his face. The young man asked to kill him immediately. The woman smiled and said that of course it could be done, but she wouldn't do it because she needed to finish the experiment. The nurse put the young man's hand to her cheek and said that he had no idea how incredible his abilities were, because he could give strength to anyone. Bai Xing was simply shocked when he heard the information that the director had predicted the development of his abilities, so he decided to find another assignment. Leaning over the young man, the woman added that the director was the smartest person on the planet, but he had not yet managed to learn everything about the technique of the sphere of light. Bai Xing now realized that he was afraid of nothing at all. He thought the director would sell him if he didn't obey, but from the beginning the man wanted to dismember him. The woman smiled sinisterly in the patient's face and asked him to transfer the ability, and in return promised to give him eternal peace in heaven. Bai Xing looked back with pitying eyes and said that he was ready to give absolutely everything, if only to die peacefully and never see this world again. Having spoken the last word, the young man raised his right hand up and began to form a ball. The woman watched this technique with admiration. As the swara began to enter her body, the nurse felt an incredible surge of strength and continued to enjoy herself imagining her new powers. Bai Xing felt something very strange, as if he had activated an ability. He continued to look up with a frightened look as the woman reveled in her new strength. After that, the young man lowered his empty eyes towards his chest and looked at the huge hole in his body, which was impossible not to notice. After that, Bai Xing opened his eyes wide and wondered why everything was happening the way it was. Couldn't he be treated differently? The young man gritted his teeth and raised his head a little, continuing to wonder why everyone treated him like a pig that they wanted to dismember. Bai Xing suddenly changed his mind and extended his right hand towards the woman, ordering his sphere to turn back. The nurse did not understand what was happening. She suddenly felt that absolutely all her strength had left her. The orb left the woman's body, leaving behind only weakness throughout her body. Bai Xing held the orb in his right hand again and suddenly heard someone approaching him. He immediately cast his frightened gaze in the direction of the door. Director Pushkin, hearing something strange inside the laboratory, immediately rushed there. He suddenly opened the door and looked to see what was happening here. Bai Xing, seeing the headmaster in front of him, immediately cried out, asking him if he had been able to foresee the death he was about to see with his own eyes. The young man had his death in mind and immediately reached for one of the scalpels to end his life and be able to be reborn in a healthy body. Stepping through the excruciating pain, Bai Xing delivered a sharp and well-aimed blow to his eye, taking the last internal organs left in his body. Yin Xiaoxiao looked up at the top floor of the high school and wondered why the young man had climbed there. Everything did not go according to plan. Using telepathic speech, Bai Xing asked the girl if she had any hidden secrets, because there shouldn't be any between allies. Yin Xiaoxiao changed the subject of the dialogue and asked the young man what he was doing on the top floor anyway. She advised him to go down because all the students are worried about him. Bai Xing smiled and said that I wanted to stay on the roof for now. After that, the young man invited the girl to tell him her thoughts about what was happening. Yin Xiaoxiao felt a little uncomfortable and asked back if people could be infected or otherwise unable to gain abilities. Bai Xing replied that people can now easily jump to a height of 3 m, run 100 meters in 3 seconds, or throw a huge nucleus like a grenade. The young man also added that people are even able to quickly restore their eardrums after they have been damaged by high-pitched sounds. Even after a nuclear explosion, it was now possible to save yourself by simply holding your breath. Human bodies were like mutants. Bai Xing continued and believed that the life of a person in this world is not worth anything at all, because in fact they cannot influence wars and everything that happens. Yin Xiaoxiao smiled and said that it was too early for them to worry about it, because they were just studying, and it is natural for boys at that age to make plans for the future. Bai Xing decided to move on to the real topic of the conversation and asked the girl what she would say about the fact that in the future he sees a whole bunch of students attacking him. The girl was simply shocked to hear the question. She understood that the barrier was broken and the young man could now penetrate the thoughts of any person. Bai Xing bowed his head and thought that it was not for nothing that he never trusted people. Everything has turned against him again, and now he is forced to confront the students. The young man sat down on the edge of the roof and told the interlocutor that he would show her his memories, where he was abused as if he were a pet. Yin Xiaoxiao replied that they were not going to feel sorry for the young man. According to the girl, humanity needs a leader who will put an end to this pollution and be ready to take confident steps. Bai Xing thought the girl was not a very good leader if she had already decided to use other people's lives because no one was allowed to risk them. The young man smiled sinisterly and came to the conclusion that the students would still not be able to defeat him, so he offered to give all his abilities to him. Yin Xiaoxiao didn't like the idea very much. She mentally called the young man a demon, and he could read every verb with the help of telepathy. After that, the leader pointed her finger at the young man and ordered the students to attack him, as a boss that poses a threat to humanity is sealed in his body. The students had already gathered in groups and were not against starting the attack. They believed that by winning this battle, they would be able to save many lives. Some students even brought some weapons with them, since they did not have a very high level of strength and were happy to share the barrels with their allies. Zhang Mu asked his teammates to be careful and not forget the rules, as their abilities could become their enemies in a matter of seconds. Chen Yin smiled and asked them to rely on his strength and unite behind him so that they could defeat the enemy with just one blow. Yin Xiaoxiao turned to her telepathic interlocutor and asked if he thought he could handle so many opponents at once. The students began to release an incredible amount of energy and transfer it to Zhang Mao. In turn, the young man gave it to Chen Inya, who concentrated it in the right hand. Bai Xing continued to sit on the edge of the roof and silently watch what was happening below. He didn't care what would happen in the next few seconds. After sitting in one place for several seconds, the young man raised the index finger of his right hand up and hinted to the students that they were looking in the wrong direction. Raising their heads, the students saw in front of them a huge shadow carried by the fairies. They were simply shocked, because they could not notice such a giant. The shadow fell directly on the students, blocking their sunlight. With the help of the energy fairies, Bai Xing was able to come up with a brilliant plan. Yin Xiaoxiao immediately understood that the fairies take away the solar energy and the shadow blocks the light, which means that the young man wants to activate the rule. Bai Xing smiled and praised the girl for her cleverness. He confirmed that very soon the students would break the rule when they changed their color under his shadow. The fairies continued to absorb the sunlight, descending downwards. The students could not do anything and silently looked at the huge shadow above their heads. Zhang Mo at one point shouted loudly and ordered his allies to gather as they must not let the young man win this fight. Chun Yin warned his partner that he could only use his compression skill on physical objects, and the shadow was not subject to the laws of physics. Bai Xing got up from his seat and looked down on him. He suggested that they attack him directly, hinting that it would be completely futile. Realizing his situation, Zhang Mu asked the young man not to kill him because Yin had arranged all this xiao xiao, prompting all the students to this adventure. Bai Xin was not going to listen to the young man for very long. He used his light sphere and passed through his body, promising to be as gentle as possible. Bai Xing gained the energy channel ability and was now able to concentrate channels of any form and manipulate them over very long distances. The young man was forced to admit that this ability suits him best. Thanks to her, he formed a huge number of light spheres and directed them at the students. Everyone present was simply shocked to see flashes of light in front of them. They didn't have time to do anything at all and just watch the spheres pass through their bodies. Bai Shun was still standing on the roof absorbing the power of the students. He pointed his limbs in different directions and waited for the spheres to enter his body. The young man received 60 abilities. After examining them, Bai Xing called the students completely incompetent, so he offered to take their lives right now. Students found themselves lying on the ground with the lowest level. Bai Xing completely drained them of their strength, so none of the contestants were able to stand up. Yin Xiaoxiao was no exception and lay helplessly on the ground, cursing the demon Bai Xing. She said that the director would not leave it so easily. After draining all of the students' strength, Bai Xing turned his back on them and said that the first level would be their punishment for conspiring against him. Now the young man had only to wait out the night. He finally had the opportunity to seal the golden bull, for which he had been waiting for several days. The morning of the next day came very quickly. Principal Pushkin was still at the university in a nearby town, where he had given his last lecture of the morning. After that, he headed to the director's office, where he began to pack his things. In the room besides him, there was an assistant and another girl. Pushkin said that there were problems at school, so he needed to return immediately. The assistant offered the director to fly by plane so that it would be faster. The professor smiled and said that he preferred the old methods of transportation and had never liked the sky, so he declined the offer. Pushkin ordered the assistant to stay here while he returned to the school with Lin Xiang. It was quite an unexpected turn for a woman driver. After that, the director turned to another girl in the room and asked her for help, because he believed that he would not be able to cope without her seals. Lin Xiang replied that the demonic bull seal removed from her abilities had already recovered, but she would like to add to her collection. The girl agreed to the director's offer and followed him to the secondary school in Huwei, leaving the assistant in the office behind. The woman was not very happy with the fact that she was staying in a nearby town. This was evident from her facial expression, which saw the girl off unhappily. Lin Xiang turned to face the assistant and stuck her tongue out at her. The sassy girl had a rank of C and a golden blood ability with a power level of over 27,000. Yue Xin was all but unconscious and lying on the mobile bed that Z had now taken into his hands, Renee. The dinosaur was holding the girl in front of Xiao Zi, who opened the portal and asked the man to hurry as they had too little time. Z Renee did not pay much attention to the woman's advice and continued to walk slowly forward. After a few steps, he found himself near the portal and was about to enter it. Xiao Zi was waiting for the moment when the opponents would be trapped by her. The woman constantly pushed the dinosaur, emphasizing the lack of time. Z Renee glanced at the woman before entering the portal. He perfectly understood that she was luring them into a trap and how it could all end. That is why the dinosaur refused to step forward. He pushed himself off the ground with all his might and jumped back to avoid danger. Z Renee found himself with the young lady a few meters away from the portal where Xiao Zi was located. The woman did not understand anything at all. The examiner decided to close the portal. Her displeased face spoke for itself. Xiao Zi asked the dinosaur what had happened so terribly. Z Renee put the young lady's bed on the floor and began a new dialogue with the interlocutor. He asked the woman why she didn't go to the portal first. Xiao Zi fast-forwarded a few confident years and said that she heard the young man's words, so she realizes that this is actually her last chance to be saved. The woman told someone that she did not want to take any chances and pointed her fingers at the dinosaur, warning him that incredible power was concentrated at the tips of her fingers. Z Renee reminded her opponent that her nails change color when she attacks, so she runs the risk of dying of coma using her abilities. Xiao Zi replied that she didn't really care about the rules of the contamination zone. She said that if the rule worked, they would all die together. The examiner pointed her fingers at Yue Xin and said that she would not let go of the dinosaur until he handed over the young lady's body to her. Realizing that the girl is in danger, Z Renee raised his hands up and agreed to the woman's terms, adding only one of his own, Xiaozi, to enter the portal with the young lady. The woman looked at the interlocutor with a displeased look. She didn't ask any more questions and agreed to let the medic enter her portal as well. Keeping the nails of her left hand away from her opponents, Xiaozi opened the portal with her right hand so that Yue Xin would finally be in her arms. Zi Renee carefully watched the actions of the woman who opened the portal in 3 seconds with caution. The man understood that Xiaozi was a little alarmed by the doctor's presence. When the portal was open, the dinosaur told the woman to roll the gurney into another space. The woman moved from her seat and walked forward with the young lady. As soon as she was almost away from her dinosaur, Zi Renee used his tail to disorient the enemy and knocked the nurse to the ground. He mutilated her legs, and the woman could not do anything about it. She also lost her balance and screamed loudly, falling face down to the ground. Xiaozi was immediately alert and pointed her hands at the nurse. This is exactly what the dinosaur needed, which distracted the woman's attention from the main events. Seeing that her rival was not looking at him at all, Zi Renee quickly turned around and took the car, which had been standing still, in his hands. After that, the dinosaur threw a large bead in the direction of the woman with all its might. The ward behind him was simply shocked by this turn of events. Xiaozi was no less shocked. She could not believe that the dinosaur did not keep his promise and asked the man, did he want death for himself and for the young lady? Zi Renee observed the events and assumed 3 variants of events. In the first, the woman simply closed the portal. In the second, she opened a new one. And in the third, she had to go to the portal herself. Xiaozi immediately headed towards the portal. The dinosaur realized that the woman had chosen the third option and recognized that it was indeed the most successful. However, Zi Renee couldn't just let his rival go. He roared loudly, creating a stream of air that he directed in the woman's direction. With his last actions, the dinosaur pushed the car that was in the air. Xiaozi saw that she did not have time to enter the portal in time. Also, she was unaware of the danger lurking beneath the car. There was a bomb attached to it, which was installed a few days before by Wang Sai. As soon as the car was near the portal, a loud explosion rang out on the battlefield. After such an encounter, Xiaozi simply could not survive. Zi Renee realized that he and the young lady were in danger, so he immediately created a barrier in order to remain unharmed. The wave of fire gradually began to fade and the barrier was no longer needed. Zi Renee had to admit that his charge had prepared very well for the mission. If it weren't for the Tyrannosaur's ability to create a force field from the attack, even his skin would have been fried from the shock wave of the explosion. As the fire gradually died down, Bai Xing arrived on the battlefield. He immediately used his ball of light to access his new abilities. After the young man took Xiaozi's abilities, he returned the orb. Bright energy rays could be seen around him. Bai Xing arrived on an incredibly bright throne and praised the dinosaur for the task accomplished. He praised the man for passing the test. Zi Renee was a little shocked to see the young man in front of him. He looked at his throne and asked how long he had been watching everything. Bai Xing replied that he had been sitting here for quite some time and had seen absolutely everything. He noted the mind of the man who drove his rival into a dead end. Zi Renee replied that Xiaozi simply did not consider the point that he was able to throw objects expertly, despite their size and weight. Bai Xing decided to present his exclusive throne to the man. He created it with Wang Sai's energy beam and a push from his classmate. Zi Renee looked at the young man with a displeased look and said that it looked like an ordinary elevator to him. Bai Xing was simply shocked to hear such a verdict. The young man wanted to surprise his husband but failed. He began to wave his arms and transform the energy beams into a balloon or a flying saucer. Calming down a bit, the allies made their way to a more or less safe location to discuss today's events that had claimed a large number of lives. Bai Xing told his new friend about the area infected with Rangwu, where most of the people were able to escape only because of his abilities. Zi Renee wanted to find out from the young man how this zone was formed in the first place. He didn't understand how a high school could keep secret information about such an area. Bai Xing told the man better not to ask such questions. Instead, he offered to tell him about the area of infection until it was completely dark. The young man began with the fact that the bull statue is a real sealed creature that was wrapped and covered with some incomprehensible layer of gold. Bai Xing continued and talked about the contagion zone that expands when the statue comes into contact with a human, which happened recently. Next, the young man moved on to awakening this very bull. The main rule for the appearance of this animal was a change in the color of a weighty object in the surrounding area. Bai Xing told about a fool who created a large amount of lava with his abilities, after which a bull attacked him from behind and took his life. Then the young man proceeded to extend the condition. He explained that when the sun completely sets, people will change their color, and in fact this will be a violation of the main rule. Baishin wanted the bull to deal with all the targets around him to awaken his true form, after which the young man would seal him. Zirene listened carefully to the young man's plan, then asked if the bull wouldn't attack them right after they changed color along with everyone else. Bai Xing opened the portal and said that he would hide inside with Yue Xin, while the dinosaur would stay outside so he could feast on something delicious. Zirene didn't really like that idea. The young man sat down on the floor and, closing the portal, said that he was joking and that the man has no sense of humor at all. Bai Xing comfortably positioned himself in the lotus position and demonstrated most of his skills. He told the man that everyone he knew now called him the King of Light. The nurse doubted the young man's words. She was visibly sweating and asked the main character if they would really be able to survive. Bai Xing replied that he could only protect himself with the sphere of light, but the energy beams and fairies should be enough to illuminate the rest of the area. The young man hadn't practiced before, but assumed that to make the lighting brighter, he just needed to increase the radius of the sphere. He looked at the sunset and adjusted the light on his spheres to the right brightness. He needed the light around them to remain the same. Bai Xing looked at those present and said that he would let them hang on for dear life, but warned that they should not prevent him from carrying out his plan. One of the servants of the Ji family and the nurse began to tremble in fear when they caught the young man's ominous gaze. They did not understand that their lives were actually in his hands. Zirene was much less concerned about the situation. He was more concerned about the young lady who was still unconscious and lying on the bed. Bai Xin looked at the sky and thought about what would happen next. He let the best man know that Pushkin could appear here after the contamination zone is sealed. The young man understood that the director could not have foreseen his unexpected transformation. In his past life, he was defeated, and in this, he did not want to make a mistake. Suddenly, the young man's thoughts were interrupted by a dinosaur. He wanted to talk a little about Yue Xin, as he had not liked the girl's condition for several hours now. The nurse suddenly intervened in the dialogue and said that she understood her insignificance in this situation, but warned that the girl needed constant supervision by doctors. Bai Xing looked at those present with an ominous look, as if warning that they should not put forward their terms in this situation. The guard explained that they were not concerned about their lives at all, but the life of the young lady, as they were constantly ordered to keep an eye on the girl. Bai Xing opened the portal and said that Yue Xin had fallen into a deep coma due to energy depletion, but she should regain consciousness and restore her energy level very soon. Before inviting the guard and medic to the portal, the young man decided to check if there was anything inside that could harm Yue Xin. Xiaozi's underwear from the portal. Now he realized that he was using the same space that the examiner was using. The young man threw all his clothes out of the portal and informed those present that there was everything necessary inside and enough resources for 2 people to survive. The nurse was incredibly happy with such news. She immediately began pushing the couch forward and asking if the young man really agreed to let them inside. Bai Xing looked ominously at the woman again and warned that they could be trapped at any moment if the owner of this portal said goodbye to his life. After listening to all the shortcomings of this technique, the nurse and the guard went inside. They were very afraid, but they had no other choice. The nurse took one last look at the real world, as if saying goodbye to it. After that, Bai Xing clenched the fist of his right hand and closed the portal. The sun had almost completely fallen below the horizon, and it was getting dark all around. Not a single sound could be heard around. The students hid, hoping for the best. Zirene looked up at the sky as the sun completely set. An energy fairy flew near him, providing daylight. Bai Xin asked the dinosaur if he was afraid. The man replied to the young man that he had never been afraid of the infected area, but this time he was really uncomfortable. Bai Xing smiled defiantly and said that there is always chaos inside the infected zone, which cannot help but affect the psyche of a healthy person. Zirene agreed with the interlocutor and added that even geniuses cannot cope with problems and save humanity from infection, and he certainly will not be able to do it. Bai Xing read his interlocutor's thoughts about families and asked what Zi's family does specifically. The dinosaur replied that he himself did not understand everything. Zirene said that Yue Xin's father, who is the head of the family, wrote an article about the connection between the infection zones in which he described the possibilities of using certain abilities. Bai Xing was simply shocked to learn that this man was the author of the theory that people gain abilities under the influence of infection. The young man was interested to know the results of his further experiments. The dinosaur replied that he could not know this, and assumed that the experiments were carried out for the sake of Yue Xin, and generally advised the young man to ask the head of the Ji family himself. Bai Xing replied that he would definitely do it if you did not survive. At the same moment, the young man offered to postpone the conversation, as he felt that danger was approaching. As soon as absolute darkness fell on the streets, the Golden Age began to operate. The screams of students who met their inevitable death could be heard all around. Students died one by one from the blows of the bull. Some even cursed Bai Xin as they believed him to be responsible for this situation. The Golden Bull continued to terrorize his victims. He reacted to the change of light and immediately killed anyone who violated the rules of the infection zone. On the territory of the secondary school in Hue, a real night terror began. It lasted for several hours, taking the lives of students. Bai Xing and the dinosaur sat under the lights and waited for the end. When they listened in silence for a few minutes, they realized that the killing was over. Immediately after that, the young man rose from his seat and prepared to seal the bull. However, there was one problem. It was necessary to find a way to do it. Bai Xing assumed that the bull was now looking for its new victims and considered this the only chance to get as close as possible to the monster. The young man's assumption turned out to be correct. The bull did hold his breath in the darkness and waited for a few more rule breakers to appear on the horizon. Bai Xing took a few confident steps forward under the guidance of the energy woman and met the bull, whose cheeks glowed with a red flame in the darkness. The young man decided to immediately look for a way and conduct an experiment with light. He released his shadows to trap the animal. Bai Xing assumed that he could make the bull no longer able to distinguish colors, and then the advantage would be completely on his side. A shadow crept towards the animal and began to envelop its body. The bull stood immovably in place and did not react at all to the approach of danger. Bai Xun saw that his shadow's coverage area was not as large as it seemed, but the young man assumed that he would be able to increase the range of his technique. He raised his power level to 3,000 and the shadow's radius really increased. She began covering the bull's body from head to toe with incredible speed. In the end, only his bright red eyes were left to glow in the darkness. The rest of his body ended up in a trap that Bai Xin had prepared. The young man continued to control his shadow and did not let the animal out of his trap. He managed to take the golden bull completely under his control. Zhi Renee observed the environment and noticed that the infection zone was indeed disappearing. The young man's plan turned out to be quite good. After the golden bull was trapped by him, Bai Xing opened the portal and released the nurse, the guard, and the unconscious Yue Xin. The woman did not understand what happened at that moment. The guard was relieved and wondered if the worst was over. Bai Xing ordered the audience to be silent and proceeded to the next point of his plan. He wanted to throw the bull into another space from where he had just taken the people. He increased the radius of the portal, reinforcing it with power points. The portal widened, and now a huge bull shrouded in shadow could fit inside. Bai Xing carried out every point of his plan without panic. He successfully pushed the bull into another space, then closed the portal behind him. The young man was satisfied that his plan had worked, but he was well aware that he had not completely sealed the bull, but he had still been able to tame it for a while. After the danger had passed, Bai Xing used his light sphere to help the unconscious girl. Zhi Renee was standing next to the young lady. After giving the girl strength, Bai Xing moved from his place and jumped from the roof. He no longer needed to stay close to his allies. Finding himself in freefall, Bai Xing looked up at the mountain and said goodbye to the dinosaur, thanking him for his rather fruitful cooperation. The young man used his new techniques of invisibility, wings, and constant thrust to be able to move through the air without any effort. After that, he used the horizon skill to search. Bai Xing decided to find his old acquaintance Kim Hookit and arrange a surprise meeting for him. Yue Xin had been in a coma for several hours. Finally, the girl opened her eyes and was able to return to the real world. She immediately jumped out of her bed and remembered the last thing she remembered. Yue Xin stood up as if she had woken up after a nightmare. The girl looked around and asked how long she had been unconscious. Zhi Renee replied that she had been in a coma for half a day, and Bai Xing had already left them. With the help of the device, the nurse measured the current volume of the girl's strength. The security guard concluded that the device could be broken because 1,200 is too big a number. Zhi Renee suggested that we postpone this research until later and hurry up. The man decided that she might be in danger because Bai Xing didn't run away just like that. Yue Xin immediately got up from the bed and put on a blouse. She said if she needed to meet her father and also to hear information about Bai Xin. The girl asked her cousin Z Renee, why does he keep the form of a Tyrannosaurus? Is there something very dangerous going on around him? Z Renee decided to show the young lady everything with his own eyes. They went out on the balcony and saw a fire in front of them in the middle of the stadium. Yuexin literally couldn't believe her eyes. She was in a coma for only a few hours, and already a lot of painful things happened. Z Renee reminded his cousin that he was acting as her bodyguard, so he offered to get out of here to keep the young lady safe. Yuexin had no choice but to agree with her cousin. The Tyrannosaurus took the girl on his shoulder and said that it was time to run away from here. After that, Z Renee will jump high into the air above the stadium. They went to meet with the head of the family to discuss important points. It was deep night outside. In the high-rise building, people did not even suspect that they were threatened by a zone of infection of rank C, literally a few kilometers away. Kuhet lived in one of the apartments in the new building. He stood by the open window and smoked a cigarette, slowly enjoying the smoke. He had a beautiful girl lying on his bed, who met him almost every evening. Likewise, every evening she asked when they would finally get married. Kim Kuhet repeated once again that his career has only recently started to go up, so he has too much work and marriage will have to be postponed. Suddenly, the lovers' dialogue was interrupted by an outsider. The door to the room suddenly opened, and a child's cheerful voice was heard from there. A not-so-tidy girl with blonde hair was standing in the doorway. She had a huge dog on a leash, which was resting a little after a long journey. The woman on the bed was simply shocked to see the child. She asked the best man who this little girl was. Kim Kuhet explained that this is his daughter from his first marriage. The man's lover did not even know about the existence of his child. The daughter pointed a finger at the guest in their apartment and said that she liked this woman very much. The girl was not going to tolerate all the lies from her lover. She said to immediately submit her things and wanted to leave her husband forever. Kim Kuhet took only his belongings and headed in the direction of the door. He told his beloved that he could not let her go because his daughter liked her. The woman did not understand what was happening and tried to stop the man. He, in turn, went to the door and left the apartment number 1409. Kim Kuhet closed the door behind him and ignored his ex's screams. He put on his bright robe and headed down the hall. The man did not live on the highest floor, so he allowed himself to go down the stairs and left the house. He confidently stepped forward. Kim Kuhet called his boss and reported on his work. Today, he managed to get 3 more debt receipts, so there should be no problems with money. The husband's career really went up. He liked it so much that his boss appreciates him and constantly gives him work that increases his earnings. Suddenly, the connection deteriorated significantly, and Kim Kuhet stopped hearing his boss. He tried to communicate, but the connection was almost lost. When the connection was returned, the boss offered his ward another job. Kim Kuhet reminded that he was on vacation, so he refused to do the task. At the other end of the wire was a young man. He replied that he completely forgot about the vacation and asked to report on today's affairs. Kim Kuhet decided that the connection had been interrupted earlier and began to talk again about the debt receipts, as well as the shops he managed to bypass during the day. Suddenly, the man was forced to interrupt his dialogue when he saw something incredible. He immediately cast his gaze behind him to confirm his guesses. He saw in front of him an old acquaintance who had tentacles instead of a left hand. Bai Xing used his sound control skills to change his voice. After hanging up the phone, the young man headed towards the man and praised him for today's work, but added that everything could end there. Kim Kuet looked at the young man with frightened eyes and understood that he did not come to him for sure. The man was very scared at that moment. Bai Xin slowly approached his old acquaintance and put his hand on his shoulder. He told him not to flinch and listen carefully to the next order. The young man reminded the man how he had treated his debtors and ordered him to do the same to himself. Kim Kuhet looked very worried. He understood that his situation was not the best. He asked the young man if he really wanted this because he could die by fulfilling such a request. Bai Xing cleared the man's ear with his sound control technique and repeated once again that he must obey his next order without question. Before sending the man away, Bai Xing gave him something. Kim Kuhet was a little shocked when he felt a sudden surge of strength. The young man decided to give him an additional 200 power points in exchange for taking away his ability. The skill of metal deformation seemed to him to be quite good. After that, Bai Xing offered to move on to the task and reminded him that one of the man's debtors had been hit by a truck. Kim Kuhet found himself on the road from the shock. It was at this moment that a truck drove through the night city. The driver did not have time to brake and hit a person who was involved in an accident against his will. Bai Xing left the man to do the task himself. Kim Kuhet had to go through many more trials, including trauma to his internal organs and holding his breath at the bottom of the sea. In turn, the young man went to his husband's apartment. He came to visit his little daughter, who did not want to open the door. Bai Xin jumped up in surprise when he saw a huge poodle in front of him, which opened the door and began to breathe right in his face. The young man entered the apartment and saw in front of him a dog and the records of a person. He greeted the girl, watching the deformed animal from above. The girl herself was sitting on the bed next to her victim. She greeted the guest and showed off her new legs, which she received from a beautiful woman. The girl invited the guest to have fun with her and her dog. Bai Xing was forced to refuse and said that he had his own fun today. He used his sphere to take the skill away from the girl. A skill called the location of objects allowed you to combine your body with any object. When Bai Xing told the girl to go to her father's place to play, the little girl put her skill into practice and teamed up with her dog in a round ball. After that, she rolled down the corridor to meet her dad's adventures. Bai Xin was finally able to breathe out and spend some time in peace and quiet. Suddenly, the young man felt an unbearable pain inside his head. He could do absolutely nothing. His brain seemed to begin to boil from incredible temperatures. Bai Xing clutched his face and lifted his head up. His right eye became like the eye of the golden bull he had sealed in his portal. The young man fell to his knees and screamed loudly in pain. He couldn't believe that the seal had broken so quickly and the monster could burst out at any second. Bai Xin curled up on the floor in pain, clutching his head with his hands. The monster in his head continued to grow larger and larger. The young man wondered if the seal was so weak that it broke literally in a matter of hours, despite the presence of energy. Bai Xun couldn't just give his body away, so he started looking for a solution. He opened the portal where his main hostage was. He was well aware that energy points alone were probably not enough, so he decided to take a part of his shadow to give himself more power. The golden bull inside was still under control despite the heavy loss of the cage. The young man began to close the portal as soon as he took what he needed for himself. This time everything ended well, but Bai Xing thought that this was just a temporary solution, and he would have to face it again. The young man looked at the floor and realized that if his energy level was insufficient, he would lose control over his body and would not be able to last even 3 days. Bai Xing even began to consider simply letting the bull loose and letting the polluted environment spread throughout the city. The young man quickly rejected this idea because it was not a way out of the situation. He needed this dangerous bull to take revenge on Director Pushkin. Meanwhile, the daughter came to her father to play. Kim Kuhet didn't look too good after going through the youngster's ordeal. Bai Xing decided to take away his power from both family members because he was not going to waste energy thoughtlessly. He got his powers back thanks to his ball of light. After that, the young man decided to use the skill of invisibility in order to begin the implementation of his plans, which changed very dramatically. After becoming completely invisible, Bai Xing went in search of Yue Xin. He wanted to meet with her father to get some advice. The Ji family was at home. He rarely cooked in his kitchen, but rather was ready to order the tastiest food for delivery. This morning, the man was enjoying noodles from the store. Ji Zhenhua was not very picky about food, despite his considerable wealth. As soon as guests came to the man, he immediately started a conversation about Ji Beiguanya, who betrayed the name of their family and dared to attack his cousin. Yue Xin confirmed that her cousin had indeed done some bad things to her, but it was unclear how her father had guessed his intentions. Ji Zhenhua laughed and told the story that from the moment the boy saw his mother naked in the bath, he started injecting him with hormones so he didn't grow up to be a normal man. The head of the family said that he also sent various people to the young man, and he thought he was cool, but his psyche was significantly damaged during this ordeal. The man also said that he tried to keep the young man's strength level at about the same level. Yue Xin interrupted her father and condemned his actions with her nephew. Zhi Zhenhua put on a serious face and told the girl not to feel sorry for this bastard because he had become a murderer since childhood and killed his 4-year-old sister. The man explained that he was not in the country that month, so his own brother took the blame, but for some reason did not punish his son at all. Zhi Zhenhua finished his noodles and put the glass on the table. After that, he continued and added that later all the details of this case were revealed, and now someone wants to get the results of his research. Yue Xin boldly interrupted her father and said that now she will be able to protect him because she has finally awakened her abilities and is ready to help in absolutely any matter. The father smiled pleasantly and congratulated his daughter. He promised her that he would definitely arrange a holiday after they had sorted out their affairs. Zhi Zhenhua asked his daughter not to worry and leave everything to him. The man suddenly remembered Bai Xin and wanted to meet this intriguing young man. The head of the family loved his daughter very much, so he did not want to let this stranger near his daughter and promised to castrate him if he dared to cling to her. Yue Xin asked her father to calm down and scare her. After that, the girl threw herself into her husband's arms, and Zi Rene watched everything from the side. Zdrovan saw serious intentions in the eyes of the head of the family. He suggested that there might be some very serious changes in the Ji family tonight. Zi Rene turned to the young lady and offered her some rest after a hard day. He did not want the girl to be part of his father's plans. When evening came, Ji Zhenhua went to his room and started getting ready. Tonight was to be a decisive night for the whole family, and for him personally. Taking the cat mask in his hands, the man thought that his daughter had passed the exam alive, which undoubtedly already became known to absolutely all ill-wishers. The head of the family put on a red cloak. He could not worry about the local residents because by the beginning of the night, almost everyone had been evacuated from the high-rise building. Now Ji Zhenhua could consider absolutely anyone who entered the building tonight as an enemy, because only the scum didn't know the rules of the house. When the man put on the cat mask, his left eye glowed like a predator's. He became like a beast about to hunt its prey. After that, Zi Zhenhua began to wiggle his new eye to adjust it a bit. This was quite enough for espionage, but it was not enough. The man reached into his inner pocket and took out a small lens. He rubbed it in his hands, after which he was going to put it on. Before that, he looked into the lens with his predatory eye to make sure it was clean. Now everything was perfect to start the mission. Zi Zhenhua put on an all-encompassing lens with a power of more than 1,000. This lens allowed him to obtain information about an object just by looking at it. In addition, the red cloak allowed the owner to travel to parallel realities, and the cat's face allowed to see only what was within the predator's power. Zi Zhenhua thought it was the best combination for tracking in the dark. Tatar, he saw absolutely everything, and not a single cockroach would slip through his eye. The man sat down in his office and began to wait. Just a few minutes later, he saw a male figure in front of him who entered the room. Bai Shun did not even allow that his invisibility would be completely useless. The young man looked around and did not see the master, although he heard his voice before that. He had very little time, so he quickly went to the table and decided to write a note, hoping that Zi Zhenhua will read the inscription. The young man took a pen and began to write information about himself. He asked his husband for help to save his daughter. The head of the Ji family watched the young man all the time. The man was not far away and could appreciate the young man's skills. He was simply shocked when he saw a list of more than 60 abilities in the arsenal of a potential opponent. Zi Zhenhua became very curious about where the young man got his abilities. He decided to use his all-encompassing eye to get accurate data. The man's left eye caught fire. He by no means expected to see in front of him what scared him to death. He had never seen anything like it in his entire life. There was a zone of contamination around the seemingly innocent young man. Zi Zhenhua saw a flash as he looked closely at his target's aura. He was so surprised that the man was thrown back. He had by no means expected to see the C-rank contamination zone that was sealed inside the young man. Zi Zhenhua decided not to disguise himself anymore and threw off all the artifacts. He exclaimed loudly, calling his guest the perfect candidate. The man even began to jump for joy. The young man is a real treasure who, with his skills, was able to easily seal the Isrango infection zone in himself. Bai Xing was very frightened and did not understand what was happening. He immediately built a barrier in front of him with the power of thought so that no one would attack him. Suddenly, the young man realized that Yue Xin's father was standing in front of him. He asked the man to behave a little more calmly and explained that he came here for help. From the host's reaction, Bai Xing realized that he needed to be more careful in order not to become a guinea pig for a brilliant researcher again. Zi Zhenhua reached for the box and replied that his nephew had told him that Bai Xing knew the rules very well, so they were not in any danger now. After a few seconds, the man pulled out some mysterious creature from his stash and threw it in the young man's direction, telling him to try it. Bai Xing was by no means prepared for such a turn of events. The young man jumped back when he saw in front of him a sea creature spitting ink. He saw a small jellyfish on the floor. Zi Zhenhua said that it was just a jellyfish prank, and the side effects definitely wouldn't hurt him in any way. The jellyfish fell to the floor and began to emit an incredible amount of ink. Bai Xing stood still and just watched the sea animal. The man warned the young man that if he did not take at least some measures, the jellyfish would continue to grow and spread the ink all over the room. Hearing these words from the head of the Ji family, Bai Xing immediately began to act. He used an energy beam to lift the jellyfish off the floor. The young man placed it directly in front of him and began to examine it. Zi Zhenhua informed his guest that this creature was called a squabbling jellyfish. The man pressed the remote control and began to tell the interlocutor about the Western continent, which is rich in oil, because of which disputes between large countries very often arise. Xi Jinchua said that in the course of conducting geological research, a lot of oil was discovered, and the country's government wanted to quietly get rich by signing secret contracts. However, literally a month later, the country ceased to exist. The man showed on the screen that it had actually turned into a huge black spot on the map. After that, the head of the G family told about the decision of the International Congress, which sent 8 C-rank military units and several hundred A-rank fighters to the territory of the small country. In the opinion of the husband and the entire Congress, it was not without contamination of the rank of the village. All the countries of the world were ready to unite in order to prevent a global crisis. Xi Jinchua explained that when the soldiers arrived at the scene, they found that absolutely none of the local residents had survived this sea of oil. Instead, they discovered some creature that continuously spat ink. They sealed these creatures and the ocean shines with blue colors again. Xi Jinchua was amazed that this small creature had actually destroyed an entire small country. A T-rank Bishket jellyfish had the ability to continuously spit ink. The Xi family advised the young man to throw a jellyfish into his space, and then there will be 2 animals inside and pollution that will restrain each other. Bai Xing suddenly realized that the man's idea was really good. He had to use his own energy to restrain the bull, and the jellyfish actually solved this problem. The young man imagined how a jellyfish fills his space with nymphs, and because of this, he cannot detect colors. In this case, he will no longer need to use his actions. Bai Xing had some apprehensions on this account, and asked the interlocutor whether such actions could lead to any unforeseen results. Xi Jinchua replied to the young man that pollution can be fully resisted only by other pollution, and he managed to prove it in practice. The man took an octopus out of his mouth and told about another of his experiments. A full octopus had the ability to absorb half of the space in which it is located. Lifting the sea animal by its tentacles, Xi Jinchua told the young man that if the animal was in his space, it would simply grow to an incredible size. The man gestured to his laboratory and added that he has many different sources of pollution in his arsenal, but they are absolutely safe and even useful. Xi Jinchua was leading to the point that he would like to exchange some of his research for a bull. Bai Xing was a little skeptical of this man's proposal. The young man suddenly paid attention to the square and the cat mask behind the interlocutor's back. He couldn't tell if the man was following him like that or if he was waiting for someone else. Returning to the topic of the dialogue, Bai Xing gave a comprehensive answer and said that he would still need the bull. Xi Jinchua was not ready to be rejected. The man looked at the interlocutor with an angry, serious look and asked, "Does the young man want to receive his own daughter in exchange for the bull?" Xi Jinchua would never give his daughter to anyone else in his life. Bai Xing stood still and did not understand what was happening. There was no way he wanted to take Yuexin away. Returning to a sane reality, the head of the Juri family offered the young man his all-encompassing object artifact. Bai Xing refused again. Xi Jinchua said that he was giving this artifact away for free for his daughter's sake. He warned the young man that he would face problems where he would need extra strength. Even Bai Xin found it difficult to argue with this fact. He took the all-encompassing object in his tentacles and began examining its abilities. After that, the young man decided to follow the researcher's advice and threw the honey with the help of his energy beam to his space. Literally a second later, Bai Xing felt the space inside fill with ink. Now he began to spend much less energy on restraining the bull. After that, Xi Jinchua told the young man to leave the premises. He added that he would like to talk more, but decided to postpone the dialogue for the next day. The man turned sharply and pointed a finger at the exit, ordering the young man to leave immediately, warning him to be careful in this very difficult world. Xi Jinchua was convinced that there were no good people in the world except for his daughter. He warned the young man that he would do something unbelievably terrible to him if he harmed Yuexin. Bai Xing went to the window and answered that on the contrary, they were going to take care of the girl. The young man did not understand at all why the man drove him away so suddenly. He did not object to the owner of the house and climbed onto the windowsill. Bai Xing used his wing skill to leave the house safely. The young man flew out of the window, not like a bird, continuing to think about his future. Now he wanted to visit Yuexin and then proceed to Pushkin. When the young man left the laboratory, Xi Jinchua continued to dabble in his experiments. He finally found what he needed. It was an A-rank sealed claw that the man thought would be a good replacement for the all-encompassing object he had just given to the guest. Taking out the claw from the box, the head of the Z family put on his red cloak and cat mask again to continue tracking the outsiders. Z's younger brother approaching him, Mei, along with his wards behind. The old man behind the second brother of the Z family was named Z Lehman. He had a snake church skill and an energy level of 4,321. The girl named Sun Miaoji had a rank and the ability of White Electric Leg with a power equal to 8,745. In front of her was Chen Kun with the ability Zhu and a power level of 13,496. Putting on the hood and adjusting the mask, Zhi Zhenchua wondered if the guests had come to take away all the research results from him and use them for their own needs. He clenched the black claw in his hand and thought that his experiments were leading in the right direction, but he still needed to make some more efforts for final success. Meanwhile, Yue Xin was in the house that was guarded by her cousin. Zi Renee stood on the street and carefully watched every movement. The girl was in her room and was getting ready for bed. She sat in a comfortable chair and bent down, doing her evening chores. Yue Xin looked thoughtful as usual. She could not get the young man who saved her out of her head, but he immediately left the scene. The girl bit her nails with the help of nippers. As soon as she bit the nail on her big toe, she heard a strange sound. Yue Xin immediately turned her head towards the window and did not understand what was happening there. It seemed to her that an attack was being prepared on her outside the window. Zi Renee was simply shocked when he saw the explosion on the second floor of the building. Yue Xin decided to attack in advance for her own safety. A fire broke out in the room that opened onto the balcony, which was immediately extinguished. The girl's room now did not look as cozy as it had a few seconds before. Bai Xing was standing on the balcony, who just had time to introduce himself to the girl. He was burned all over from the temperature control his girlfriend used on him. Realizing that a friend had come to see her, Yue Xin immediately began apologizing and offered to call a doctor. Bai Xing refused this offer. He said he could heal himself. It was just a good opportunity for him to test abilities that he had never used before. Bai Xing used the skill of golden armor, restoration, and bone strengthening, and his body began to regenerate literally before his eyes. Bai Xing thanked himself that he had learned such skills from the students. After that, he asked the girl if she really wanted to kill him. Yue Xin apologized and hurried to explain everything. She said that she suddenly heard a familiar voice but could not orient herself quickly and decided to defend herself immediately. The girl added that at that moment she assumed that an attempt could be made on her by enemies who faked Bai Xin's voice and broke into her house. In the end, everything ended well, and Yue Xin wondered how the young man was able to recover so quickly. She asked if it was really possible. Bai Xing smiled and replied that miracles sometimes happen. The young man also explained that he came here to make sure that everything was fine with the girl. Yue Xin was very pleased to hear these words. She wanted to thank the young man personally and had no idea what he had to come through. Bai Xing laughed again and thanked the girl for her concern. He added that everything was perfectly fine with him and that Yue Xin was an obedient girl. At that moment, the girl received a phone call and explained to the guards that she simply lost control of herself and did not need any help. As soon as Yue Xin finished the phone call and wanted to continue the dialogue with the young man, he spread his wings to leave the house. Bai Xing went out on the balcony and said that it was time for him to go back, as he had many unsolved cases waiting for him in this evil world. Yue Xin suddenly stopped the young man and said that she had never been able to thank him. The girl offered to spend the evening together and have dinner in a restaurant. She immediately went to change and asked to wait. Bai Xing thought about whether he should go to dinner, because wasting time is definitely not good for him. The young man understood that Director Pushkin still has the ability to predict the future, so it is absolutely useless for him to run away and he will find him anywhere. For several minutes, Bai Xing was completely absorbed in thinking about his future. He came to the conclusion that Pushkin must already know about his plans. The young man understood that he would never succeed in bluffing and that his only hope was to use psychic skills, but Pushkin could foresee even that. Suddenly, the young man's thoughts were interrupted by a girl who said that they could go. Bai Xing was simply shocked when he turned back and saw his companion. Yue Xin wore a bright blue dress with white sleeves that suited her very well. She looked incredibly attractive. Bai Xing appreciated the girl's appearance. Yue Xin winked at her companion and asked him not to worry about the future and live in the present, because it is important to remain calm in any situation. Bai Xing agreed as a girl and offered to fly. The young man added that he had no money, so he asked the girl to treat him today. Yue Xin was a little scared when she heard the words about the flight. She didn't really like moving in the air, especially sitting on top of the wings. Bai Xing said he had come up with a much better idea. With his energy beams, he created a carriage in the air just for the two of them. Yuexin agreed to board and the lovers flew to the restaurant. Ji Renee looked at the carriage in the air and did not understand what was happening there. Literally in a few minutes, the young man and the girl flew to the restaurant in the center of Huwei. A lot of people gathered here every evening. Yue Xin literally set the buffet table and said that she had always dreamed of it, but father wouldn't allow it. Bai Xing noted that everything looked very appetizing. The girl wished her companion bon appetit, after which she took a fork and cut off a piece of cheesecake, deciding to start with something sweet. Looking at the dessert, Yue Xin said that she was finally able to awaken her abilities, and now she has a lot of ideas in her head. Bai Xing also began to have dinner and supported the dialogue. He advised the girl but warned her to be ready for any development. Yuan Xin replied that she was absolutely not afraid, as long as the young man and her father were by her side. The girl was ready to study every day to control her power. Bai Xing used telepathy to read the thoughts of a girl who wanted to control the temperature at any cost and protect her loved ones. The young man exhaled and said that he was ready to help his friend in any situation. First of all, he offered the help of his medical technicians. While the dialogue continued, the interlocutor was having dinner and empty bowls literally filled the table. Yue Xin had an incredible appetite tonight. Bai Xing was simply shocked and only had time to count the empty plates. Yue Xin was able to eat her food with peace of mind by using her additional skill of increasing the size of her stomach. Everyone present was simply shocked to see the reincarnation of the girl. Yue Xin told her companion that she didn't eat much at all tonight. As the young man sat in complete shock, the girl said that she could never eat enough to waste because she lost her appetite, but now she is grateful for her skill. Bai Xun thought that his female companion would not like the way she looked in the mirror. He decided that it was necessary to somehow help her get back in shape. The young man thought about using the skill of compression or creating an illusion, but he understood that this would have no effect and would only be a deception for the girl. Yue Xin, meanwhile, wanted some more fruit to finally fill up. The girl suddenly noticed that the chair under her ass had shrunk significantly. Bai Xing sat opposite and did not understand. Did the girl not understand that she had overeaten and the chair could not shrink, but only her ass could grow? The young man allegedly went to get some fruit, and looking at his companion, decided that he would better take a napkin to wipe the girl's tears after what he saw in the mirror. Bai Xing strode confidently forward and did not look at his feet at all. He suddenly entered some black substance without noticing it at all. The young man just passed by without paying attention. Something like ink spilled onto the floor, but it was much more transparent and spread slowly. After the touch of Bai Xin's foot, circles began to form in the puddle, radiating from the center. Something resembling a human record began to emerge inside. When the flow of water calmed down, a reflection of a young man who stepped into a puddle appeared inside. It was an absolute sinister copy of the young man. Bai Xing, meanwhile, picked up some fruit on the plate with his left tentacle and strode towards the table again, ignoring the puddle under his feet. As the first time, the young man again stepped into the black substance. This time he didn't notice anything again and was just going to walk towards his companion. However, suddenly Bai Xin began to be sucked inside. The young man stopped in one place and did not have time to do anything before his disappearance. In less than a second, there was absolutely nothing left of his body. It completely sank into the mysterious substance from which small drops of water poured. Yue Xin continued to sit at the table and took a cocktail. She was waiting for her fruits and did not understand where Bai Xin could have gone. The young man seemed to wake up the next morning and opened his eyes wide. He saw the sky in front of him and did not understand where he was drawn to. He ended up in an open space with a plate of fruit. Bai Xing continued to fall down in a free fall, unable to catch on to anything. The young man could not understand what was happening at all. Only after a few seconds did he realize that he might die from the fall. Realizing this, Bai Xing immediately decided to use his wings. He shouted loudly, commanding his wings to appear immediately. When the skill was used, the young man tried to save himself from falling. He was simply shocked when the wings literally refused to work for him. Without thinking long, Bai Xing proceeded to use his next skill and decided to create an airship, hoping that it would at least save him. However, everything turned out to be much worse than the young man imagined. His next skill also refused to work and he was still in the air. Bai Xing concluded that everything was planned. He got to the no-fly zone, so he can't escape. The young man perfectly understood that if he fell into the sea from such a height, he would definitely not be without injuries, and maybe he would even say goodbye to life. There really was an endless sea under his feet. It was constantly bubbling. as if calling the young man to it with its huge waves. Baixing decided to use other abilities. He focused on body enhancement skills so that his internal organs would survive. The young man activated the transformation and began to change his body. He decided to use all the defensive skills that were only available to him at the moment. In a fraction of a second, he turned into a real stone ball, covering his body with stone skin. All this time, he continued to fall. Also, Bai Shun did not forget the skill of his tentacles and completely covered his body with it. In this situation, the sign decided to focus on protection. He looked as charged as possible and continued to use every technique possible. The young man continued to fall, his hair blowing in the wind. Bai Xing used every possible animal skill in his arsenal. His armor was covered with living animals that served as a living shield. A smile appeared on the young man's face when he realized that everything was going according to plan. He also used the compression skill to increase the density of the air. It turned into a giant bomb out of the blue. The young man's body was covered with a magnetic field and used a constant push. After completing his reincarnation with the flamethrower technique, Bai Xing decided that he could stop there, and now he would definitely stay alive. Bai Xing paid tribute to his classmates for having an incredible amount of skills that would help him save himself collectively. Now the young man began his next task. He began to think about who could have dragged him into this space, and even so, unexpectedly. While the young man was in the air, his owners were already waiting for him at the bottom of the sea. From the water, it was visible how something was approaching. A dark green mermaid spotted a target approaching the sea. She reported that it looks like guests will visit them soon. The woman spoke to the people inside the water globe. Unlike mermaids, they could not speak, so they were forced to stay in a tank. A woman named Yui Sansan had the ability to turn into a mermaid. She turned to face her allies and told them to prepare for the abduction. Kun Xiaohua had the ability to steal other people's skills with a power level of 5,739. The girl wanted to reserve the right of first choice if her skills were key to their mission. Yang Capen had the skill of the air bubble they were currently in. The young man added that he was ready to give in to everything, but he wanted to take the energy crystals. Hui Sansan told her allies that they would have time to deal with the rewards, but now they needed to focus on the target that was rapidly approaching them. Kun Xiaohua replied that she was fully ready to be captured. As soon as the object began to approach, the girl put her hand in front of her and used the abduction skill. As soon as she finished the ritual, a mischievous jellyfish appeared in front of her with a frightened face, as well as a sphere of light and 2 crystals. Kun Xiaohua looked at the jellyfish and called it a completely talentless creature. In fact, they only managed to obtain energy crystals with a total power level of less than 1,000. Yang Capen took the crystals for himself and said that they were rightfully his. Despite the small catch, the man was still satisfied with the result. Yui appeared on the battlefield Sansan. She targeted the young man and said she would take what was left of the murder from him. Lifting her head up, the mermaid saw that their goal was not slowing down. She was simply shocked because she did not understand how he continued to move without skills. Bai Xing wasn't even going to slow down. He flew down, wrapping himself in all his possible defenses. The atmosphere seemed to be starting to melt. Suddenly, the young man felt how the golden bull wanted to break out. He did not understand anything at all and assumed that Ji Zhenhua could somehow take the jellyfish from him. Bai Xing immediately rejected this option because he was in another dimension. He decided to use his telepathy skill to find nearby enemies. Having done this, the young man could read the thoughts of 3 people who were under the water. They were waiting for him and were ready to attack at any moment. Now Bai Xing was convinced that the jellyfish had been taken from him by his enemies. He clenched his teeth with all his might and tried to restrain the bull that wanted to break out. The young man perfectly understood that he needed to start acting earlier than his rivals. That is why he decided to use the shadow to catch his enemies off guard. Holding his hand out in front of him, Bai Xing used a shadow skill and released it from his incredible armor to scout around. Having seen it all with my own eyes, Yui Sansan was not happy at all. She saw that the opponent was too strong and she definitely couldn't handle him. The mermaid was not confused and immediately began to swim in different directions, waving her tail. She created the mermaid whirlwind to trap her target. Yui Sansan knew perfectly well that it was almost impossible to get out of her vortex, so now all that was left was to wait until the young man got inside. Bai Xing sent his shadow forward instead of him. His black copy entered the water with great speed, holding his right arm out in front of him. The mermaid was simply shocked when she felt a touch on herself. A black shadow began to envelop her, preventing her from continuing to move. Meanwhile, Bai Xing continued to fly down at an incredible speed. It was no longer possible to see his form at such a tremendous speed. Baixing entered the water without losing his speed. His form was half that of a bull, his right horn sticking out, cutting everything in its path. The young man landed successfully. Taking advantage of the form of his shadow, Baixing cut the mermaid with a bull's horn, splitting her in two. Yui Sansan could not have expected such a turn of events. The woman could do absolutely nothing, and the young man continued to attack. The mermaid was simply shocked to see the young man behind her back. Baixing had outwitted his rival and now had the opportunity to take away her abilities. Holding the mermaid's head in his hand, Baixing took away her ability to transform into a mythical animal, then crushed his rival. Despite the bull's incredible strength, Baixing was grateful to him for the breakthrough, because now he could actually control the infection zone around him. While the young man was enjoying his new form, a new danger formed behind him. When he noticed this, he immediately turned his head back. The young man saw in front of him a man inside a balloon. Using telepathy, he read his thoughts, which were focused on the attack. Thanks to this, Baixing understood the principle of action of balloons. In front of him was a golden ball, which contained a large amount of poison inside. Yang Kappan asked his opponent if he hoped to dodge this attack. The man explained that even such a course of events would not save the young man. Right after his words, Yang Kappan blew up his bullets with poison, and it poured right into the water. Baixing was forced to retreat very quickly. A sinister smile appeared on the man's face. He shouted that he wanted to see the death of the young man and take all possible power points from him. Baixing understood very well that he needed to fight the poison. He instantly used the compression skill to stop the toxins from spreading into the sea. For a few seconds, the young man managed to retain the poison and concentrate it in one place. The compression skill was the best fit for this matchup. Yang Kappan's constant shouts reminded him that he was still pressing. The man warned that it was not so easy to dodge his bullets. The poison continued to spread and almost reached Baixing's face. At this moment, the young man suddenly remembered Z's words, Zhenchua, about infection zones. He remembered that one infection zone can only be defeated by another, so he asked the inner bull if he was tired of being in captivity. After that, the young man decided to let the animal out for a walk. He loosened his armor and now the golden bull could roam free. A huge zone of infection was formed around it, which covered an incredible area. People inside the balloons were trapped without realizing it. The infected area continued to grow for several seconds. Yang Kappan was a little shocked. Two areas of contamination collided before his eyes. He saw in front of him a young man whose body seemed to merge with the infection. Now he realized that his opponent had been carrying this zone all along. Yang Kappan, visibly worried, asked his opponent what he had done. The man tried to understand what kind of creature he was. Yang Kappan decided to use his skill called Lost Wind, which allowed him to move to a completely random point on the planet. Suddenly, the man felt the bullet in his hand disappear. Kun Xiaohua continued to be in the balloon and was responsible for this event. She used her ability to steal someone else's abilities and informed him that the man would not be able to escape, and instead she would be the first to do so. After her words, the girl said goodbye to her allies and burst the balloon in her hands. After that, she had to immediately move to some point. However, events turned in a completely different direction. The girl failed to deceive her ally. She simply lost consciousness after the bullet in her rust burst. Young Kappan only laughed at the girl for her imprudence. What she didn't know was that due to lack of energy, she might just shut down after this technique. Instead, the man concentrated another balloon in his hand and burst it to move to another point and escape the infected area. A strange aura similar to free wind began to form around him. A smile appeared on the man's face, which alerted the enemy to something bad. Baixing was still in his place and watched impassively as his opponent used an incomprehensible technique in an attempt to escape. After a few seconds, the man's lost wind stopped working. His aura returned to normal and the speed skill did absolutely nothing. Yang Kappan was simply shocked by this turn of events. He couldn't believe that inside this contamination zone, he was forbidden to use the lost wind. The man decided to buy himself some time and created several spheres around him. He directed them in different directions so that he could escape once more. Explosions rang out in the endless sea at a distance of several hundred meters from each other. The zone of infection of the Golden Bull covered this entire area. Yang Kappan once again tried to use his skills, but nothing worked. The man turned his face to the sky and screamed out of hopelessness. He had an incredible amount of skills in his arsenal, but in this situation they were completely inept considering the strength of the opponent. Young Kappan looked at the young man in the sea and thought about killing him as soon as possible. It was quite a task. especially in his area of infestation. In addition, the man needed to deal with the zone itself afterwards. He understood that if he could not deal with the infection, there would be no point in the young man's death. Bai Xin, in turn, felt at home. Looking around, the young man said that he really liked it when everything belonged to him. Suddenly, he stopped the flow of his thoughts and turned his attention to his enemy, who is a few meters away from him and is preparing for some sort of scramble. Bai Xing, after reading his opponent's thoughts, realized that he wanted to kill him. He looked down at him and said it was impossible. After that, the young man used the skill of the Golden Bull. It was called instinctive teleportation and made it possible to move in space with incredible speed. In less than a second, the young man was behind his opponent. Yang Kepen was simply shocked, feeling the presence of the young man a few centimeters away. The man couldn't believe that a skill with such speed even existed. Even his lost wind could not compete with such an incredible ability. Bai Xing suddenly saw a tank of poison on his way and informed his opponent that he also had a technique for teleporting objects. In a second, the poison was over the young man's head. He swung his right arm and smirked at his opponent before attacking. Yang Kepen realized that things were very bad for him. The man had no idea how to get out of the situation where fate had dragged him. Yang Kepen tried to retreat back, shooting back with his balloons. He didn't look at where he was hitting and just tried to run away. Bai Xing reacted completely calmly to the opponent's attack. He opened a portal in front of him and sent all the enemy's blows into a parallel reality. Absorbing his opponent's attack, Bai Xing noted that the man really had good skills, but his golden bull was already getting quite bored. After a successful defense, the young man again put his right hand in front of him and, controlling the poison, shot it at the man who was trying to retreat. Yang Kepen was defeated by his own technique, which he used against his opponent. The poison began to consume his body and the man screamed loudly in despair. His skin began to dissolve in the water. Yang Kepen shouted loudly, cursing the man named Zhang Yang who dragged him into this reality. After the opponent's death, Bai Xing used his god hand and took the B-rank balloon from the man, which allowed him to create absolutely any form. The young man did not even expect to receive something so powerful when he got to the bottom of the sea. He was visibly pleased, clenching his fist in the river. After defeating one enemy, Bai Xing sailed to another. He ended up near a balloon, inside which was an unconscious woman. He destroyed the barrier and took from her a skill called Thief's Hand. Bai Xing received a nice addition to his god hand. The young man learned that this technique has a certain barrier to use. He needed his master's hand to use his technique. With the help of a skill he took from Kim Kuhet's daughter, Bai Xing easily separated the arm from the body, leaving the woman without a limb. After that, using the body change skill, Bai Xing transplanted his left arm to himself. This process brought him incredible pleasure. Now the young man had two hands again. He looked at his limbs and admitted that he had gotten so used to the tentacles that it was unusual for him to have two arms now. After that, Bai Xing proceeded to close the infection zone. He took the jellyfish and launched it back into his dimension with an energy beam. Medusa found herself back in space and her ink began to work again. The golden bull calmed down and the young man's body was again taken into physical account. Bai Xing decided to take a look at his new abilities, because he understood that he might need them in the future and should be ready to use them. Among several enemy skills, the young man noted one called Holy Water. The item was quite rare and gave the opportunity to regenerate during a match. Bai Xing now began to think about how he should go back to Yuexin. He found out that he was in an area of rank, a contamination called the Dream of the Whale. While pondering how his enemies had reached this contamination zone, he suddenly noticed that Kun Xiaohua behind him had suddenly disappeared. Bai Xing remembered what was in Yan's memory. There were several other people behind him, so the young man did not change to assume that the woman behind him had just been saved by someone. Even so, Bai Xing had much more serious problems. Medusa was really doing very well with the bull, but there was one problem. The young man's body was still subject to infection. The jellyfish ink was not enough to completely restrain the bull's power in the parallel space.